Imagine tuning into the ocean's radio waves and hearing a distress call from a ship that vanished decades ago. Across vast, restless waters, some vessels disappeared without a trace, yet faint SOS signals continue to surface, as if the sea itself refuses to let them go. In this exploration, we follow these ghostly transmissions, from luxury liners lost in fog to cargo ships swallowed by open seas, tracing the echoes of lives once aboard and the technology that tried to preserve them. Each signal tells a story, a lingering cry that challenges both logic and expectation, inviting you to uncover the mysteries that ripple beneath the waves. If you listen closely, you might catch the faint pulse of a call that should have been silenced forever. The SS Marine Sulphur Queen's post-loss broadcast. The waters south of Florida have long been a repository of unanswered disappearances, but few inspire the same quiet unease as the loss of the SS Marine Sulphur Queen, a converted T2 tanker that vanished without a trace in February 1963. Its final recorded position lay near the Florida Straits, a corridor known for unpredictable currents and sudden weather changes, yet none of those conditions alone could explain how a 523-foot vessel carrying nearly 15,000 tons of molten sulphur could disintegrate so completely that not a single identifiable piece of the ship was ever recovered. What deepened the intrigue was not merely the absence of wreckage or the unknown fate of its 39 crew members, but the later claims that faint and fragmented distress tones matching the tanker's call sign were intercepted long after the ship was believed to have broken apart and sunk. Those familiar with the ship's construction history often return to the troubled process of its conversion, which involved modifying a World War II-era tanker to carry heated sulphur at temperatures exceeding 275 degrees Fahrenheit. Investigators later noted structural complaints dating back several voyages before its disappearance, including reports of stress cracks near the keel and difficulties maintaining stable heat across the extensive cargo tanks. These details were part of the official Coast Guard inquiry, yet they existed in a separate realm from the accounts that surfaced years after the loss, when independent radio operators along the eastern seaboard claimed to hear something that should not have existed. Bursts of distress rhythms resembling the Marine Sulphur Queen's unique identifier, TAQM, pulsing through atmospheric static. In many of these accounts, the descriptions carry a similar tone of quiet disbelief rather than embellishment. Operators spoke of late-night monitoring sessions when the noise floor settled low enough for older, fading bands to open for a moment, revealing brief signals that belonged to no modern vessel. The tones lacked voice, pattern clarity, and complete SOS structure, sounding instead like truncated segments of a once coherent message. Specialists who examined these anecdotes emphasized that the TAQM sequence had been retired from use after the tanker's disappearance, which meant that any later activation would require a rare atmospheric coincidence, or something far more difficult to explain. Some researchers attribute these reports to the peculiar behavior of high-frequency radio propagation, especially during periods of heightened solar activity. Under the right conditions, signals may travel long distances after bouncing across different layers of the ionosphere, sometimes causing delayed echoes of unrelated broadcasts. Yet even this explanation fails to account for why the call pattern identified by multiple listeners resembled that of a tanker lost years earlier, a vessel that carried no automatic distress transmitter, capable of continuing after the hull was gone. The Marine Sulphur Queen, built decades before modern emergency beacons, relied entirely on manual radio operation, requiring a functioning power system and a living radio officer. Neither could exist in the conditions believed to have overtaken the ship. Older archives from the Coast Guard investigation offer a sober foundation for the mystery. Among the few pieces of debris that could be linked to the tanker were life jackets, a fragment of a nameplate, and traces of sulphur residue found on floating life preservers, yet none showed signs of fire or explosion. The absence of any large or identifiable wreckage led investigators to consider the possibility of catastrophic structural failure. This hypothesis fits with the vessel's previously documented hull issues, but it leaves no room for any scenario in which radio distress intervals might continue long after the crew's last confirmed communication on February 4, 1963. Those who catalogue anomalous maritime transmissions often point to a sequence logged in the late 1970s by a small cohort of amateur radio operators along the mid-Atlantic coast. According to their notes, the signal arrived as a faint rhythmic pattern matching a portion of the Morse call associated with the marine sulphur Queen. The logs describe it as neither continuous nor intelligible, but distinct enough for experienced operators to identify the cadence. Efforts to trace the source failed, leaving no clear origin or vessel that could have produced the sequence. Critics suggest that old equipment or atmospheric ducting may have carried the dying fragments of an unrelated transmission, but the operators who recorded the incident were known for their precision and skepticism. Along the Gulf Stream's restless boundary, the absence of answers encourages theories that extend into the unknown spaces of maritime history. One of these theories speculates that certain structural components of the ship, if torn away yet kept buoyant by enclosed chambers, could have drifted for years before finally sinking, possibly carrying a portion of its radio equipment. The idea is technically improbable, as the ship's radios required stable electrical power that would have vanished the moment seawater flooded the relevant compartments. But the suggestion persists because it offers at least a mechanical framework for the strange late-century intercepts. Other operators focus instead on atmospheric memory phenomena, events where abandoned frequencies seem to momentarily reanimate during specific conditions. These moments do not represent literal transmissions from the past, but rather rare overlaps of interference that mimic historical signals. Even this explanation requires a confluence of events so precise that the repetition of a defunct call sign remains deeply unlikely. What matters most in many of these recountings is not whether the signals were genuine transmissions from the lost tanker, but that they appeared at all, echoing at the edges of human perception and technical possibility. Some maritime historians emphasize that the marine sulphur Queen occupies a place in shipping records where the absence of definitive evidence leaves room for narratives shaped by uncertainty. Its disappearance aligned with well-documented structural concerns, yet the complete lack of large debris challenges even the most straightforward explanations. The latter intercepts, faint and fragmentary, exist in this same contested space. They are not proof of survival, nor clear artifacts of atmospheric distortion, but remnants of sound interpreted by listeners who understood both the limitations and possibilities of long-distance radio. Even in official reports, the investigators acknowledged that the sea conditions in the Florida Straits during the ship's final voyage did not fully account for its total erasure. The ship was large enough that portions of its steel framework should have remained visible or recoverable, yet nothing substantial ever surfaced. This rarity fuels the persistent attention given to the later radio incidents, carving out a space where technical fact, human interpretation, and maritime folklore converge. The uncertainty becomes part of the vessel's legacy, allowing each fragmentary intercept to carry the weight of a question that has never been resolved. And some nights a faint pulse of static still drifts across the frequencies as if something long lost is trying to speak again. The persistent signal of the SS Baychimo. Beyond the edge of the frozen coastline, the Arctic waters stretch in endless silver, and it is here that the tale of a ship abandoned decades earlier begins to drift into memory. The SS Baychimo, a cargo vessel built in 1914 and later employed by the Hudson's Bay Company, was left to the mercy of Arctic ice in October 1931 after repeated efforts to salvage her during a severe storm proved futile. Despite the crew abandoning the ship on that frigid day, reports surfaced for years of a massive hull seen moving stubbornly through ice floes, refusing the finality of sinking. Though her disappearance was noted in shipping records, her persistence transformed her into something more than a mere lost freighter. She became a ghost that traversed the edges of human perception, carrying the weight of unanswered questions across the northern waters. Across the shifting ice fields, Inuit hunters and later passing sailors reported glimpses of a hulking form that seemed to float without purpose, refusing to disappear despite the years. Sightings were documented sporadically from the 1930s to the 1960s, sometimes hundreds of miles apart, with witnesses describing a rusted skeletal frame barely above water, yet eerily intact. In 1939, a small team of whalers boarded the ship, discovering cabins frozen over and cargo untouched, as if the ship had chosen to suspend time within its decks. Each encounter added new layers to her legend. She was never found capsized, never broken apart, yet she never returned to a port either, drifting on an invisible path that challenged conventional maritime logic. Buried within the decks of the long-abandoned cargo ship, the faint outlines of wireless equipment once powered by human hands suggest the possibility of messages sent long after the crew had vanished. The Baychimo carried a shortwave wireless set standard for 1920s merchant ships, intended primarily for ship-to-coast communication across the frozen northern trading routes. Even when abandoned, the presence of these instruments fuels speculation that faint signals might have been produced by environmental factors, whether through residual electrical currents, battery remnants, or mechanical resonance triggered by shifting ice and storms. In the Arctic, where sound and electromagnetic energy behave unpredictably, the line between a genuine transmission and an atmospheric illusion is almost imperceptible, leaving room for the imagination to attach itself to each faint pulse. Decades after the last confirmed sighting, scattered observers along remote Arctic coasts described irregular bursts on the long-wave frequencies, a sequence that no modern vessel could claim. Some reports emerged in the 1960s and early 1970s when radio operators monitoring old shipping bands noted faint intermittent signals resembling the patterns of early merchant ships. The transmissions were brief, inconsistent, and impossible to trace, yet the rhythm reminded seasoned listeners of call signs long retired. There was no verification, no source identified, only the spectral suggestion that the Baychimo, or at least some fragment of her presence, had endured long after she should have decayed into the ice and sea. Under the auroral skies and in the magnetically restless Arctic night, static and faint pulses travel in strange, unpredictable ways, creating patterns that can mimic the voices of ships long gone. High-frequency waves can reflect off ice layers or ionospheric disturbances, producing echoes that arrive hours, even days after their initial emission. While scientific explanations exist for some of the reported signals, they fail to account for the specificity of certain sequences that listeners insisted mirrored the Baychimo's earlier transmissions. In a place where frozen expanses absorb sound and cold winds distort it, the possibility that a ship might speak from its watery grave is amplified by isolation, by the vast distances between witnesses, and by the Arctic's strange gift for preserving the past in both material and spectral forms. Far from shipping lanes and human settlements, the vessel was last recorded in 1969 near Point Barrow, after which even the faintest hint of its presence seemed to vanish into the ice. By this time, the Baychimo had become more myth than cargo vessel, a ship whose appearances defied logic and whose silence suggested a finality that never fully arrived. Yet the scattered reports of signals persisted, appearing in logs kept by dedicated amateur radio operators, some noting bursts that coincidentally aligned with long decommissioned marine channels. These anomalies, ephemeral and unverified, were nevertheless enough to keep the legend alive, casting the ship as an enduring question mark upon the Arctic waters she traversed. In the villages that border the Beaufort Sea, stories of a drifting ghost ship blend with reports of subtle radio echoes, leaving locals uncertain whether the Baychimo persists above water, below, or somewhere in between. Elders recount tales of spotting her in fog and ice, sometimes just a silhouette against the horizon, other times only a hint of her bow cresting above a frozen ridge. The combination of legend, factual sightings, and unconfirmed signals creates a liminal space where belief and evidence intersect. Each story contributes to a perception of the ship as semi-sentient, a vessel that continues her northern patrols regardless of the laws of physics or human observation. Though no wreckage has been conclusively identified, the Arctic night continues to cradle the question of whether fragments of signal or steel endure beneath the ice, leaving silence to answer in waves. The Baychimo's fate, like the ghostly whispers that follow her through decades of Arctic isolation, resists closure. Each intercepted pulse, each fleeting sighting, and each anecdotal account reinforces the sense of a vessel that cannot be fully claimed by history, yet refuses to disappear entirely. In this frozen expanse, mystery is as tangible as ice and as enduring. In the long silence that follows each winter storm, some listeners still wonder whether a forgotten hull beneath the ice continues to whisper across the Arctic night. The return transmission of the MV Joyita. Bobbing eerily on the turquoise expanse of the South Pacific, a solitary freighter was discovered with no crew aboard, its name whispered only later as the MV Joyita. The vessel had departed Apia, Western Samoa, in October 1955, bound for Auckland, New Zealand, carrying 25 passengers and crew along with cargo that included refrigerated goods, general supplies, and a small complement of vehicles. When she was spotted by the freighter Lurline 2 weeks later, the ship appeared afloat but unmanned, drifting under reduced sail with no signs of struggle yet distinctly off course. Observers noted the incongruity of her condition. The Joyita was seaworthy, engines capable of operation, yet completely abandoned, a ghostly presence on the vast ocean. The Pacific heat reflected off her deck, glinting on rusted surfaces and casting the empty lifeboats in long, silent shadows, creating a vision both extraordinary and quietly ominous. Inspectors who first climbed aboard found cabins frozen in stillness, charts and logs left mid-entry, and a galley where food had begun to decay untouched, as if the ship had simply been paused in time. The engine room was powered down but showed no signs of sudden malfunction, and the navigational equipment indicated that a steady course had been plotted before the crew disappeared. Lifeboats were either missing or unseaworthy, one partially swamped by water, and the steering gear, while operable, did not indicate that the ship had been actively navigated. The human element was absent entirely, leaving investigators to reconcile the dissonance between a functional vessel and the total evacuation of those aboard. It was a silence that seemed purposeful, an eerie calm that suggested a departure without warning, yet without evidence of panic. Within the wheelhouse, the shortwave radio set remained intact, buttons and dials untouched, a silent machine that could have sent distress signals long after the last hand had released it. The equipment was typical of mid-1950s freighters, capable of sending messages across the Pacific to shore stations and other vessels. While the radios were found powered down, the possibility lingered that atmospheric phenomena or residual electrical currents could have produced faint pulses long after the crew vanished. Investigators noted that the ship's call signs were still associated with her registry, and although modern vessels no longer use the frequencies, the mere existence of such equipment on an empty ship suggested the potential for post-loss transmissions, unintended yet tantalizingly plausible. Years after the ship was found, isolated radio operators described faint, intermittent pulses across the old maritime frequencies, sounds they could neither confirm nor fully explain. Some claimed to hear irregular Morse sequences that resembled the Joyita's previous call signs, often occurring at night or during storm-prone periods when static dominated the airwaves. No one could verify these transmissions, and no systematic records corroborated the occurrences, yet their persistence in anecdotal reports lent a spectral quality to the vessel's story. Operators described the sounds as brief and elusive, never forming complete messages but enough to hint at life, or some remnant thereof, within the ship long after her abandonment. Despite extensive investigation, theories ranged from sudden storms and structural failure to piracy and mutiny, yet none accounted for the eerie possibility that the vessel might have broadcast fragments of SOS after her disappearance. Typhoon records from late September and early October 1955 show minor storms near the shipping route, but nothing sufficiently severe to explain the complete absence of crew. Structural concerns had been raised about hull maintenance, particularly in tropical waters where rot could weaken timbers, yet the Joyita was inspected regularly and considered seaworthy. Piracy and mutiny remained speculative, with no evidence ever found to support such claims. Still, the juxtaposition of a fully functioning vessel and missing humans left a gap in understanding that seemed to invite more than one explanation, and it was in this gap that the notion of phantom signals emerged. The Joyita entered maritime folklore, influencing shipping regulations, insurance assessments, and the cautious respect with which captains treated small freighters in remote waters. Maritime authorities revised inspection protocols, paying closer attention to engine maintenance, crew safety drills, and the reliability of emergency equipment. Stories of the abandoned ship circulated among seafarers, blending verified observations with speculation, lending the vessel an almost mythical status. Her presence became a cautionary tale about the unpredictability of the Pacific, and yet, paradoxically, her abandonment suggested a secret continuity, as though the ship herself refused to fully vanish from human observation. On rare occasions, longwave listeners reported fleeting sequences that resembled abandoned call signs, brief interruptions in static that hinted at a vessel continuing to whisper across the waves. These signals, often recorded by amateur operators in isolated stations, were ephemeral and inconsistent, sometimes coinciding with geomagnetic activity or stormy weather. While no evidence connected them definitively to the Joyita, the reports endured, suggesting that even after decades, the ship maintained a spectral presence in the ether. The tension between verifiable fact and unexplained anomaly reinforced the vessel's legacy as a liminal object, tangible yet elusive, historical yet almost alive. Silent and derelict, the Joyita became more than a ship lost to history. She stood as a vessel whose absence seemed almost alive, leaving only fragments of rumour and trace behind. Each investigation, each report, each anecdotal whisper across the Pacific waves contributed to a narrative that could not be resolved by evidence alone. Historians and seafarers alike are drawn to the story, compelled by the questions the ship leaves unanswered. What became of the crew? How could a seaworthy ship drift alone for weeks? And might some remnant of her presence persist beyond the limitations of human observation? Even now, decades later, some sailors swear they can detect a faint, impossible pulse across the South Pacific, as if the Joyita herself refuses to be forgotten. The reappearing SOS of the SS Waratah. Departing Durban under a clear morning sky, the SS Waratah carried passengers and cargo along the South African coast, yet within days she vanished from all charts and sight, leaving only the suggestion of her last course. The vessel, a passenger cargo steamer built in 1908, was on a routine voyage to Cape Town when she disappeared, transporting over 200 passengers and crew along with general cargo that included refrigerated goods and mail. Weather reports indicated calm conditions at departure, yet the ship never reached her destination, and no distress call was officially recorded at the time. The Waratah's sudden absence shocked maritime authorities and ignited speculation across newspapers and shipping companies, as the powerful vessel simply seemed to evaporate into the South Atlantic, leaving a haunting blank space in maritime records. Search parties scoured the waters for weeks, discovering scattered debris and lifebuoys but no trace of crew or passengers, and newspapers chronicled the mounting mystery with a mixture of fact and conjecture. Coastal towns along the Eastern Cape reported fragments of cargo washing ashore, small crates and personal effects that hinted at the ship's final moments but offered no clear narrative. Observers recorded sighting reports of a large ship-shaped object in foggy distance, though none could be verified. The lack of survivors and the absence of coherent wreckage challenged investigators and left the mystery unresolved. Each discovery, however minor, seemed to deepen the enigma of a vessel both known and unknowable, a ship whose presence persisted only in fragments. Though the ship vanished without a trace, her wireless set remained capable of a signal, a device that might have transmitted faint, unanswered distress calls into the night long after the ship sank. The Waratah had been equipped with a Marconi shortwave radio, standard for passenger steamers of the early 20th century, capable of transmitting to shore stations hundreds of miles away. While the last recorded transmission before her disappearance was routine, the presence of a working wireless set raised the possibility that intermittent signals could have emanated post-loss, whether from electrical residuals, atmospheric anomalies, or simple coincidence. In the early decades of wireless navigation, faint or unexplained signals were not unusual, yet the notion that a vessel might call from beneath the waves added a layer of unease to an already confounding disappearance. In the years following, Cape Coast radio operators reported fleeting bursts of SOS signals matching the Waratah's call sign, signals that seemed to dissolve the instant they were heard. These signals, often heard late at night during periods of high static or geomagnetic disturbance, were never verified by official authorities. Yet their persistence in anecdotal reports suggested that some aspect of the Waratah, whether mechanical, environmental, or spectral, might have continued to assert itself across the decades. For those operators, the faint, irregular pulses seemed eerily specific, prompting questions about the nature of post-loss transmissions and the potential for a vessel to linger in signals long after she should have been claimed by the sea. Historians and mariners alike have debated the fate of the Waratah, weighing violent oceanic phenomena against structural weaknesses and human error, yet none can fully account for the persistent whispers of her wireless across decades. Contemporary investigations suggested possible sudden rogue waves, severe storms, or instability from cargo shifting, yet meteorological records offered little confirmation of catastrophic events on her route. The ship's design, a large double-screw steamer with a relatively low centre of gravity, had been deemed sound, and crew competence was never seriously questioned. Nevertheless, the absence of any coherent wreck or survivors left the door open to speculation. Perhaps the vessel had suffered a rare maritime calamity, or perhaps the signals heard later were echoes from a ship refusing to be forgotten. The ship's disappearance claimed more than 200 lives and left a mark on maritime safety protocols, influencing navigational charts, insurance practices, and the public imagination for generations. Archival materials from Lloyd's Register of Shipping, contemporary newspapers, and government correspondence preserve the Waratah as both a historical fact and a source of enduring fascination. Maritime historians often cite the case as one of the great unexplained losses at sea, while the general public has long embraced the narrative of the vanished liner as a ghost ship legend. The combination of human tragedy, operational mystery, and potential post-loss communication elevates the Waratah beyond a simple shipping accident into a narrative that bridges history and speculation. On the storm-lashed South African coast, long-wave reflections and surging waters might bend transmissions, hinting that the Waratah could still be detected, however faintly, far from sight. The region's geography, with strong currents, shifting sandbanks, and seasonal weather variations, complicates any attempt to locate wreckage or confirm signal origin. Ionospheric reflections can carry radio waves for hundreds of miles under the right conditions, and geomagnetic disturbances sometimes amplify fleeting patterns. While scientific explanations can account for some anomalies, the precision of certain reports describing recognizable call signs continues to suggest a lingering maritime presence that defies conventional understanding. Though no wreck has been confirmed, the story of the Waratah endures in the minds of those who listen to the ocean, a lingering echo of a vessel that vanished too suddenly to be forgotten. Each search, each recovered artifact, and each anecdotal signal contributes to a sense of incomplete closure. In the minds of sailors, historians, and coastal observers, the Waratah exists in a liminal space between fact and legend, a ship both present and absent, silent yet capable of a voice that emerges only in fleeting, unverified moments. The mystery remains unresolved, not for lack of effort, but because the sea itself seems determined to preserve the unknown. More than a century later, some coastal listeners claim to catch a faint, impossible SOS on the wind, as if the Waratah's voice refuses to sink into the depths. The recurring call sign of the Ourang Medan. Late one night in the waters of the Straits of Malacca, a series of Morse code transmissions crackled over the radio, announcing the presence of a ship later identified as the Ourang Medan. The freighter had been registered in the Dutch East Indies, operating in the late 1940s to early 1950s, carrying mixed cargo that reportedly included chemicals and general goods. The initial transmissions were received by nearby vessels and coastal radio stations, describing a crew incapacitated or dead, and yet the ship remained physically unverified. Weather reports from the region indicated calm conditions in the days preceding the signals, though the straits themselves were known for unpredictable currents and localized storms. Observers later noted that the calls were chilling in tone, their timing erratic yet consistent enough to suggest a lingering presence, one that was almost alive in the radio waves themselves. The messages, brief but chilling, conveyed that the crew and officers were dead, with punctuation and spacing that suggested urgency, fear, and a ship in silent distress. Operators recorded fragmented sentences such as "all officers dead and I die," repeated in rapid succession before fading into static. No survivors were ever confirmed, and the content of the transmissions blurred the line between factual distress and maritime legend. The atmosphere aboard nearby ships became tense. Sailors described an almost palpable dread when tuning to the frequencies that carried these transmissions. Every crackle of the radio seemed to amplify the notion that something had gone catastrophically wrong, and yet the exact details of the disaster remained elusive. Within hours, rescue ships were dispatched to the reported coordinates, cutting through misty waters and turbulent currents. Yet, when they arrived, no trace of the vessel or her crew could be found. The freighter was never sighted by the searchers, and no debris field sufficient to account for the number of people aboard was recovered. Contemporary maritime records confirm the dispatch of patrol and commercial vessels, yet logs reflect only frustration and unanswered questions. Even the search patterns, calculated based on the ship's last known position and drift estimates, fail to intersect with any tangible sign of the Ourang Medan. Each passing hour seemed to stretch the enigma further, turning what should have been a straightforward rescue into an enduring puzzle that would haunt maritime authorities for decades. Accounts diverged. Some sailors reported glimpsing a dark hull drifting alone, while others claimed they heard only static or fragmented Morse signals, creating a web of contradictions that frustrated investigators. A handful of vessels passing through the straits at the time recorded unusual disturbances on their instruments, while local fishermen told stories of a ghostly ship vanishing into mist before anyone could approach. Official records often conflicted with anecdotal testimonies, leaving historians to piece together a narrative from partial evidence. The ambiguity reinforced the sense that the Ourang Medan existed as much in perception as in physical reality, a vessel whose presence was simultaneously confirmed and denied, a paradox that lent itself to speculation and legend. Maritime radios of the late 1940s were capable of long-range transmission under certain conditions, but atmospheric interference and geomagnetic fluctuations could render signals intermittent, distorted, or seemingly impossible. Shortwave equipment could bounce signals across hundreds of miles, occasionally producing anomalies that mimicked recognizable patterns, yet nothing entirely explained the clarity and repetitiveness of the Ourang Medan's SOS. For radio operators of the era, the transmissions occupied a liminal space between technology and the uncanny. The line between malfunction, misinterpretation, and genuine distress was blurred. Each instance of reception was fleeting, often fading before full comprehension could be reached, and this very elusiveness contributed to the ship's mythic status. Maritime analysts have long debated whether a chemical leak, sudden fire, or accidental poisoning incapacitated the crew, leaving the ship to transmit its haunting calls from an empty deck. Some reports suggest that nitrocellulose or other volatile cargo could have released toxic gases, explaining the sudden incapacitation of the crew without leaving external signs of struggle. Others speculate that an onboard explosion or fire was possible, though no wreckage confirmed such a scenario. Even in these factual considerations, the recurring SOS signals hint at an unresolved phenomenon, an echo of the crew's final moments that defies conventional explanation. Analysts caution that while natural explanations exist, the report's persistence lends an aura of the inexplicable to the Ourang Medan story. The Ourang Medan quickly entered maritime legend, her story chronicled in Lloyd's List and newspapers alike, her ghostly SOS a tale repeated among seafarers and enthusiasts decades after the supposed sinking. The ship became a cautionary tale in shipping circles, a narrative combining operational risk, chemical hazards, and the unknowable forces of the sea. Over time, the vessel's story migrated from maritime reports into popular culture, inspiring books, radio dramas, and later discussions in maritime mystery forums. Her legacy is not only historical but psychological, the recurring signals and reported sightings creating a persistent narrative that bridges fact, speculation, and folklore. For those who study the case, the Ourang Medan embodies the tension between recorded history and human fascination with the unexplainable. It has been suggested that by listening we maintain the ship's memory, a ghostly echo in maritime consciousness that resists full understanding. Each retelling, each recording, and each analysis reinforces the idea that the Ourang Medan endures in some way, her distress calls echoing across time and space. Mariners today occasionally report fleeting anomalies on radio equipment along similar shipping routes, and while unverified, these incidents are interpreted by some as the persistence of the ship's voice. The story blends technical possibility with human perception, creating an enduring atmosphere of suspense that is as much psychological as it is maritime. From time to time, brief SOS signals pierce the airwaves as if the Ourang Medan continues her ghostly voyage unseen by the world. The false resurrection of the MV Derbyshire. On a September morning in 1980, the MV Derbyshire embarked on what was intended to be a routine iron ore shipment from Canada to Japan, a vessel of immense size and strength carrying 44 crew members across the turbulent Pacific. The Derbyshire was one of the largest British bulk carriers of its time, a 91,000-ton freighter, constructed to navigate treacherous waters with reliability and speed. Her route traversed the North Pacific, where seasonal typhoons and unpredictable currents were a constant hazard, and her cargo of iron ore added immense weight and complexity to her handling. Despite her size and design, the Derbyshire carried a history of rigorous inspections and maintenance, making her sudden disappearance all the more alarming to maritime authorities and shipping companies alike. The ship's last transmission, routine in nature, offered no hint of the catastrophic events that were about to unfold. Within days, Typhoon Orchid engulfed the Derbyshire, and the ship vanished from radar, leaving maritime authorities to piece together its fate from fragmentary debris and weather records. The storm produced winds exceeding 100 knots and waves towering above the decks of even the largest freighters, conditions that tested the limits of all vessels in the region. Ships in proximity reported violent seas and scattered debris, but none observed survivors or could determine the precise location of the sinking. Initial investigations suggested a rapid loss, with the Derbyshire likely succumbing to flooding or structural failure within moments, leaving no time for a coordinated distress call. The absence of survivors and the scarcity of wreckage created a vacuum of certainty that would fuel speculation for the years to come. From crackling receivers, reports emerged of faint SOS signals attributed to the Derbyshire, fleeting Morse code bursts that some radio enthusiasts insisted defied explanation and suggested a lingering maritime presence. Shortwave operators occasionally recorded garbled messages that matched the ship's call sign, yet they were so irregular and faint that official authorities dismissed them as interference or misidentification. Still, the persistence of these reports created a modern layer of mystery around a tragedy already steeped in loss. Amateur radio operators, motivated by curiosity and a sense of connection to maritime history, tracked anomalies along the Pacific shipping lanes, noting patterns that seemed almost deliberate. These fleeting signals lent the Derbyshire an eerie posthumous voice, as if the vessel were reaching across decades to communicate with the living. In 1994, an expedition led by Robert Ballard located the wreck nearly 4 kilometres beneath the ocean's surface, revealing the physical truth of the Derbyshire while opening new questions about its final moments. The hull was found broken into 2 main sections, consistent with catastrophic structural failure, and forensic analysis showed that the ship had suffered progressive flooding, likely exacerbated by storm-induced stress. The discovery of the wreck provided closure regarding the ship's final resting place, yet it also highlighted the violent conditions that could have caused such sudden destruction. The sheer depth and inaccessibility of the wreck meant that direct observation of the cargo holds and crew areas was limited, leaving room for speculation about the precise sequence of events that led to the loss of all hands. Detailed examination of the hull and cargo holds revealed catastrophic structural failures consistent with storm-induced stress, yet forensic investigators noted elements that fueled speculation about the suddenness and severity of the loss. The iron ore cargo, densely packed, could have shifted in the rolling seas, creating unexpected stress on bulkheads and decks. Investigators analysed metallurgical data and hull fatigue patterns, concluding that progressive structural weakening combined with the typhoon's force likely caused the vessel to break apart rapidly. Yet even with these findings, the speed and totality of the sinking suggested that something unusual had occurred, contributing to the enduring fascination with phantom signals and post-loss anomalies that seemed to echo across the Pacific. Archival reports and accounts from seafarers who navigated the Pacific in the same period provide glimpses of the human dimension, illustrating both the ferocity of the typhoon and the enduring fascination with the Derbyshire's disappearance. Colleagues of the lost crew, maritime historians, and shipping company officials all contributed observations and records that enriched the narrative of the ship's final voyage. Some accounts describe near misses in the same storm, underscoring the extreme conditions that challenged even the most experienced mariners. These stories, combined with modern reports of unexplained signals, create a layered portrait of the Derbyshire, a vessel grounded in factual tragedy, yet hovering at the edges of mystery. Sporadic reports from radar and radio operators decades later suggest unexplained signals along the Derbyshire's course, a lingering puzzle between technology and mystery. Meteorological conditions, ionospheric reflection, and equipment interference can produce faint signals, yet certain listeners insist that the cadence and content align too closely with the Derbyshire's known call signs to be coincidental. Each report reignites curiosity among maritime enthusiasts, generating discussions that blend science, history, and the enduring allure of ghost ships. The Derbyshire has become both a case study in naval architecture failure and a symbol of the ocean's capacity to retain secrets, with its occasional posthumous signals serving as a haunting reminder of lives lost at sea. The story of the Derbyshire endures not only in maritime records, but in the imagination of those who ponder the possibility that some ships leave more than wreckage behind. Her sinking remains a case studied in naval architecture, meteorology, and risk management, yet it also inhabits a liminal space where fact meets folklore. The juxtaposition of rigorous scientific explanation with reports of anomalous post-sinking signals gives the Derbyshire a dual existence, a real, discovered wreck and a phantom presence in maritime consciousness. Mariners, historians, and radio enthusiasts alike continue to reflect on the vessel, drawn by the tension between what is known and what may still linger, unseen beneath the waves. After the hull was located and the mystery of its sinking largely explained, occasional SOS reports whispered through maritime channels as if the MV Derbyshire were asserting a presence that refused to be fully accounted for. The Morse echo of HMS Eurydice. A chilling fog hung over the Isle of Wight as the English Channel heaved beneath unseen currents, a place where the HMS Eurydice would vanish, leaving only questions that would echo for generations. The vessel, a Royal Navy training ship, carried hundreds of cadets and crew on what was intended to be routine exercises in February 1878. With her three-masted frigate rig and 1,635 tons of displacement, the Eurydice was designed for both instruction and resilience, yet she faced the unpredictable fury of the North Sea and Channel waters. On board, cadets drilled under strict supervision, their routines disciplined and precise, entirely unaware that a single night would turn their lives into maritime history marked by tragedy. The vessel's last observed position placed her near the Isle of Wight, but from that moment onward, she seemed to dissolve into the winter storm, leaving nothing but speculation. Winds rose without warning, tossing the tall masts and rigging as cadets and crew struggled against the relentless surge, and soon the ship disappeared from view, swallowed by the stormy waters. Eyewitnesses on nearby vessels recalled seeing the Eurydice's struggle against waves taller than her forecastle, her sails torn and snapping in the freezing wind. The ship heeled sharply, then appeared to vanish behind the crest of a massive wave. Within moments, the full scale of the disaster became apparent. 309 lives were lost, a number that stunned the Royal Navy and the public alike. Debris eventually washed ashore, fragments of timbers and personal items hinting at the violence of the sinking, yet nothing could convey the speed or finality of the Eurydice's disappearance. In the aftermath, the incident became a benchmark for discussions on naval safety, ship design, and the dangers faced by even well-prepared vessels. Through static-laden early radio channels years later, whispers circulated among operators of faint Morse code pulses that seemed to carry the Eurydice's unmistakable call sign, mysterious transmissions, impossible yet persistent. Beginning in the early 20th century, as wireless technology became more prevalent, amateur and professional operators occasionally intercepted irregular bursts that they attributed to the sunken ship. Though official records confirmed that the Eurydice had sunk decades earlier, the cadence of these transmissions suggested a deliberate pattern. Enthusiasts documented the signals meticulously, noting the frequency, timing, and apparent origin in the channel. Whether coincidence, interference, or some enigmatic maritime echo, these pulses captured imaginations, suggesting that the tragedy of the Eurydice might somehow extend into the modern age. Working through stacks of documents, historians and naval archivists meticulously cross-referenced ship logs, newspaper reports, and Royal Navy inquiry records, seeking patterns that could reconcile factual loss with the anomalous signals. Accounts from the Times and other contemporary newspapers offered details of the storm, eyewitness observations, and the Royal Navy's immediate response. Inquiry records outlined the vessel's construction, rigging, and the rigorous training routines expected of cadets. Researchers noted the consistency in the ship's reported last positions, yet the anomalous signals remained unexplained. Some scholars speculated that the echoes were a form of cultural memory transmitted through radio anomalies, a technological reflection of collective mourning and fascination with the Eurydice. Others suggested they might be atmospheric phenomena manifesting in Morse-like patterns, a natural occurrence that seemed almost deliberate to attentive listeners. Maritime engineers point to atmospheric reflection, equipment quirks, and long-range radio anomalies as possible explanations, yet the timing and character of the pulses often defy conventional interpretation. During certain seasons, temperature inversions and solar activity can bend radio waves in unusual ways, producing fleeting signals that appear to originate from the sea. Early wireless receivers, highly sensitive but prone to interference, could misinterpret distant transmissions, creating patterns that eerily resembled the cadets' ship call signs. Yet the frequency and sporadic nature of the Eurydice signals seemed too persistent to be dismissed as random. For those who recorded them, the pulses were more than noise. They were fragments of a ship's story, haunting the medium that had been invented long after the vessel's disappearance. Local fishermen, coastal watchmen, and passing sailors occasionally recounted subtle flashes on instruments or rhythmic pulses in radio bands, reinforcing the legend of a ship that refused to vanish entirely from human perception. One retired mariner recalled hearing a sequence that mirrored the Eurydice's known signal while navigating near her last reported coordinates, describing the experience as an echo from another time. These personal anecdotes, though unverified, contributed to a folklore that entwined fact with eerie possibility. They suggested that the channel itself might carry the imprint of maritime disasters, a kind of residual energy manifesting in sound, electromagnetic pulses, or human perception. The narrative of the Eurydice thus shifted from mere tragedy to a story of persistent presence, where history and legend collided on the restless waves. The Eurydice has endured in memorials, literature, and naval studies, her story amplified by reports of ghostly Morse signals, ensuring that the vessel persists not just in history, but in maritime consciousness. Monuments along the Isle of Wight coastline commemorate the cadets lost, while naval historians examine her sinking as a case study in training ship vulnerability and storm navigation. Simultaneously, ghost stories and radio enthusiasts' accounts preserve the sense that the ship's presence lingers. Books and articles discuss the Morse echo, framing it as a cultural phenomenon that merges maritime heritage, technological curiosity, and human fascination with the unknown. The Eurydice exists in duality, documented historical fact and the intangible imprint of memory, and a signal that refuses to fade. Between recorded events and lingering enigmas, the ship's narrative lingers at the intersection of documented tragedy and unexplained phenomena, leaving historians and enthusiasts alike to ponder the strange persistence of signals that seem to bridge past and present. Though much is known about her construction, her voyage, and the storm that claimed her, the mystery of faint Morse pulses suggests that the sea, and human perception of it, retains traces of lost vessels far longer than expected. The combination of fact, folklore, and technical anomaly creates a story that is neither fully explained nor entirely imaginary, a liminal space where history whispers across decades to those who continue to listen carefully. As years pass since she sank beneath the channel, some claim that faint Morse pulses trace her path, as if HMS Eurydice still communicates across time to those listening with patient ears. The phantom broadcast of the SS Valencia. A dense, unyielding fog rolled over the jagged Oregon coastline, where the waters seemed to conceal both history and hidden voices, and it was here that the SS Valencia would meet her fateful end. The passenger steamer, measuring roughly 3,719 tons and stretching over 400 feet, carried hundreds of travellers on what should have been a routine voyage from San Francisco to Seattle in January 1906. Built for speed and comfort, she featured powerful steam engines and ornate passenger accommodations, yet the rugged Pacific Northwest coastline would prove a far greater challenge than any design. On board, passengers went about their daily routines, unaware of the impending storm and the treacherous rocks lurking beneath the swirling waves. The Valencia's last official coordinates placed her near Cape Mendocino, but from that point forward, she disappeared from view, leaving only the roar of surf and a trail of questions that would echo through maritime history. Rocks hidden beneath the turbulent waves claimed the vessel with terrifying speed, leaving survivors clinging to debris and rescuers struggling against a merciless sea. The storm that night was fierce, a combination of high winds and icy water that overwhelmed lifeboats and capsized smaller craft attempting to reach the ship. Reports indicate that over 100 passengers and crew perished, their bodies carried away by the currents or washed ashore along the rocky coastline. Those who survived described the violence of the waves, the sudden loss of landmarks in the blinding fog, and the desperation of attempting to signal nearby vessels with flares or whistles that were quickly lost in the storm. The tragedy became a grim marker of the dangers inherent in navigating the Pacific Northwest, a region notorious for fog, hidden rocks, and unpredictable currents. Decades after the wreck, radio operators along the Pacific Northwest reported intermittent SOS signals that bore the unmistakable signature of the Valencia, a ghostly repetition of a tragedy long past. Beginning in the 1920s and 1930s, as maritime wireless communication became increasingly widespread, amateur radio enthusiasts occasionally detected pulses that seemed to spell the ship's name or follow its original call pattern. While no official source could validate these signals, their timing and location, near the site of the wreck, stirred curiosity and speculation. Some suggested that the ocean itself carried residual electromagnetic energy, a phenomenon that could distort and mimic recognizable patterns, yet these accounts remained anecdotal, tantalizing listeners with the suggestion that the Valencia's presence had not fully receded beneath the waves. Lighthouse keepers and mariners described faint rhythmic pulses through static-filled equipment, signals that seemed to emanate from the very waters that had swallowed the ship. One keeper at the Tillamook Rock Lighthouse recalled hearing bursts of Morse code in the dead of night, precise enough to suggest intelligence, yet faint and fleeting, disappearing before it could be fully recorded. Mariners reported similar encounters, noting that the signals often coincided with foggy, storm-prone conditions, amplifying their eerie effect. These witnesses, though far removed from the original tragedy, contributed to a growing narrative of the Valencia as a ship whose story was communicated through whispers in the airwaves, a vessel that refused to be forgotten by those attuned to its phantom broadcast. Engineers and historians debated whether atmospheric reflection, long-range propagation, or equipment quirks could account for these mysterious signals, yet none offered a definitive explanation. Radio waves can travel in unusual ways, bending along temperature inversions, reflecting off atmospheric layers, or interacting with geomagnetic phenomena, and early wireless equipment was sensitive to interference that might produce illusory signals. Still, the regularity and identifiable patterns associated with the Valencia transmissions defied easy dismissal. Some speculated that the combination of the Pacific's electrical conditions and coastal geography created a perfect environment for such anomalies, yet others argued that human expectation and legend shaped perception, causing ordinary interference to be interpreted as messages from the past. Over the years, the Valencia became more than a shipwreck. She became a legend, her name whispered among sailors as a cautionary tale of fog, rocks, and signals that should not exist. Books and newspaper articles chronicled her sinking, the loss of life, and subsequent reports of ghostly communications, ensuring that the vessel remained present in collective memory. Maritime folklore elevated the Valencia into a symbol of both the unpredictability of the sea and the mysterious persistence of maritime tragedy, a vessel whose presence was said to linger in the fog and surf. Stories circulated of the ship briefly appearing off the coast, veiled in mist, or of radios picking up fleeting SOS transmissions during storms, reinforcing the idea that some disasters resist finality. Even today, divers, historians, and radio enthusiasts trace the ship's path along the Oregon coast, fascinated by the blend of verifiable tragedy and enigmatic transmissions that continue to inspire curiosity. Wreckage that has been located offers insight into the ship's final moments, from hull damage patterns to artifacts preserved beneath sand and silt, yet these tangible remnants cannot account for the intangible echoes reported decades later. Researchers continue to investigate historical records, local reports, and technical possibilities, seeking explanations that reconcile physical reality with reported anomalies. The story of the Valencia thus persists across multiple layers: the documented loss, the human memory that endures through narrative, and the mysterious broadcasts that suggest a presence beyond the material world. The story of the Valencia lingers in the boundary between fact and phantom, where waves, fog, and faint radio pulses intertwine to preserve the memory of a ship that disappeared too suddenly to be forgotten. Each new signal, each recalled burst of Morse code, adds to the tapestry of mystery, compelling observers to confront the limits of knowledge and the peculiar ways in which the sea keeps history alive. Between the rocky coves and storm-swept channels, the ship's tragedy becomes more than a past event. It becomes a recurring phenomenon, a reminder that even disasters buried beneath water can find expression in forms unimagined by those who documented them. Amid the relentless fog and crashing surf, some insist that faint SOS calls ripple from the depths, as if the SS Valencia refuses to be silenced by time or tide. The late-coming SOS of the MV Belinda. The crackle of static filled the small radio room, and as the operator adjusted the dial, the faintest hint of a familiar call sign emerged, a signal that seemed impossibly tied to the MV Belinda. The freighter, a steel-hulled vessel weighing approximately 4,500 tons and stretching nearly 370 feet in length, had departed from Halifax with a cargo of coal, bound for Liverpool, in November 1947. On board, a crew of 36 maintained the ship and its equipment, accustomed to the long Atlantic crossings and the dangers inherent in North Atlantic weather. Yet on one night, the ocean's sudden ferocity transformed routine vigilance into disaster. The vessel's last known coordinates placed her near the eastern approaches to Newfoundland, but from that point onward, the Belinda vanished beneath waves that rose taller than any lookout could anticipate. On a frigid night, gale-force winds and heavy seas overwhelmed the freighter, tearing at rigging and pitching the ship onto hidden shoals that lurked beneath the roiling water. Survivors were few, accounts varied, and no organised distress call had reached nearby vessels in time. Debris later washed ashore along Newfoundland's coast, scattered fragments of coal, lifeboats and personal effects telling of the violent final moments. Shipping companies and the Canadian Coast Guard conducted extensive searches, yet the Belinda remained lost to the sea, a cautionary tale of human vulnerability against the relentless power of the Atlantic. The swiftness of her disappearance left an impression on maritime records and local memory alike, her loss becoming emblematic of the treacherous northern waters. Many years on, operators scanning the same frequencies began to report intermittent SOS transmissions, repeating patterns that eerily mirrored the Belinda's registered call. Beginning in the early 1960s, as post-war maritime radio usage increased, signals emerged with a perplexing regularity, often coinciding with stormy nights or periods of heavy atmospheric disturbance. Radio enthusiasts meticulously documented these anomalies, noting that the pulses seemed to originate near the historical wreck site despite decades having passed. While technological explanations were possible, the uncanny timing and recognisable patterns inspired speculation that the Belinda's presence had somehow endured in the medium of radio, a phenomenon that defied conventional understanding of maritime communication. Coast Guard personnel and amateur enthusiasts alike recounted moments when the signals cut through static with startling clarity, vanishing as suddenly as they appeared, leaving a lingering unease. One retired operator described hearing a clear SOS that followed the vessel's original call letters, transmitted in a rhythmic pattern reminiscent of the Belinda's communication protocols. Nearby, weather conditions often amplified the experience. Fog, rain, and heavy surf created an atmospheric environment where each static burst felt laden with urgency. Witnesses were unanimous in their reaction, an immediate sense that they were encountering something inexplicable, a voice from a vessel long thought submerged and silent. In pursuit of clarity, marine engineers and radio historians pored over equipment schematics and weather logs, seeking rational explanations from ionospheric reflection to lingering electromagnetic anomalies. The North Atlantic is known for its complex weather systems and electrically charged storm fronts, conditions that can bend and carry radio waves far beyond expected ranges. Early post-war radio receivers, though capable of detecting long-distance signals, were also prone to interference and amplification of atmospheric noise. Yet even with these factors considered, the patterns reported by observers suggested an intelligence behind the pulses that could not be dismissed as coincidence. Analyses attempted to account for drift, distance and frequency, but the enigmatic signals persisted, baffling experts and deepening the mystery. Stories of the late-coming SOS entered local lore, shaping the way seafarers and coastal communities spoke of a vessel that seemed to defy the finality of time and water. Fishermen along Newfoundland's eastern shores told of sudden bursts of Morse code amid stormy nights, interpreted by some as a spectral call from the Belinda. Newspapers occasionally printed accounts from amateur radio enthusiasts, framing the ship as a ghostly presence whose voice defied decay. In maritime culture, the vessel became a symbol of the Atlantic's uncanny power to preserve echoes of tragedy, a reminder that even as decades passed, human attention remained attuned to signals from what was lost beneath the waves. On airwaves spanning coastlines and oceans, maritime enthusiasts and signal trackers recount attempts to capture the Belinda's ghostly transmissions, blending historical curiosity with a thrill of encountering the unexplained. Modern receivers, far more precise than mid-century equipment, occasionally register bursts of static with rhythmic qualities reminiscent of the ship's call sign. These contemporary experiences continue to intertwine technical observation with the allure of mystery, prompting debate over whether the phenomenon is a natural anomaly, an artifact of human expectation, or something that transcends conventional understanding. Each reported signal adds to the layered narrative of the Belinda, reinforcing her presence not merely as a historical vessel but as a lingering echo in the consciousness of those who monitor the seas. The MV Belinda endures in memory and in fleeting, unverified pulses, a reminder that even after decades, the sea may preserve echoes of what was once thought irrevocably lost. Waves crash over the coordinates where she sank, storms sweep across the North Atlantic, and yet some insist that her story continues to speak to those attuned to the subtle rhythms of maritime history. Between recorded fact and anecdotal evidence, the ship exists simultaneously as a tragic reality and a phenomenon of persistent resonance, a vessel whose disappearance remains as compelling as the occasional signals that pierce decades of silence. In the Atlantic's shadowed depths long after the MV Belinda sank, faint SOS pulses are said to emerge at night, as though the ship's voice traverses decades to reach those who dare to listen. The strange interference of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. Through the hiss and crackle of Lake Superior's stormy nights, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald once transmitted her presence, a giant among freighters whose signal now seemed to linger long after her disappearance. Built in 1958 and measuring 729 feet in length, the Fitzgerald was the largest vessel on the Great Lakes at the time, designed to carry iron ore from mines in Superior, Wisconsin, to steel mills in Detroit. Her steel hull stretched wide and formidable across the waves, yet even such construction could not shield her from the tempestuous November waters of 1975. On board, a crew of 29 men faced routine challenges of navigation, weather, and cargo management, unaware that a storm of historic proportions awaited them. The vessel, normally a beacon of industrial might, would soon encounter a force so absolute that no human skill or machinery could withstand it. November winds tore across the lake with relentless force, waves rising higher than many of the ship's crew had ever encountered, challenging both vessel and navigator in equal measure. Winds exceeding 50 knots lashed the deck while waves of 35 feet or more collided with the bow, slamming against the hull with deafening crashes. Iron ore shifted precariously within the holds, creating instability that compounded the ship's peril. The Fitzgerald's captain, Ernest McSorley, maintained communication with the Sulocks and nearby vessels, reporting the violent conditions while attempting to navigate the treacherous waters. Yet even with meticulous adherence to protocol, the storm's fury escalated faster than any forecast could predict, leaving the ship vulnerable to the lake's raw, unpredictable energy. Radio operators recalled fleeting bursts of distorted Morse, signals fragmented and irregular, appearing at the precise moment the Fitzgerald was lost to the storm's fury. Coast Guard stations and other freighters documented brief, inexplicable interference, static that seemed to follow a rhythm resembling the ship's call sign yet never fully cohered into a recognizable message. Some signals appeared to pause mid-transmission, only to resume seconds later before disappearing entirely. These ephemeral bursts created a haunting effect, as if the Fitzgerald's presence lingered just beyond comprehension, audible yet unreachable, leaving witnesses both awed and unsettled by what seemed an impossible phenomenon. In laboratories and field stations, engineers and communication specialists examined the evidence, considering electrical anomalies, lightning-induced pulses, and unusual atmospheric reflections as potential causes, yet none fully explained the eerie patterns. Lake Superior's notorious weather and geomagnetic properties create conditions where electromagnetic pulses can bend, reflect, or resonate unpredictably, and the Fitzgeralds' own electrical systems could have interacted with these forces in ways that defied contemporary understanding. Detailed analyses of transmission logs, storm conditions, and ship schematics offered partial insights, but never accounted entirely for the recurring anomalies reported over the hours of the storm. Even today, experts acknowledge that the strange interference represents one of the more enigmatic technical occurrences in maritime history. Other freighters on the lake noted intermittent static that seemed almost purposeful, a distorted echo of the Fitzgerald's call that vanished before it could be clearly understood. Mariners described it as a rhythmical pulse embedded within the chaos of storm-driven interference, the kind that briefly captured attention and then dissolved into white noise. Some recalled hearing signals while monitoring routine frequencies, and though many attempted to decode the pulses, they yielded nothing more than mystery. These observations, scattered across multiple reports, suggested that the Fitzgerald's presence had manifested through its machinery and environment in ways that blurred the line between technical anomaly and unexplained phenomenon, leaving an imprint on those who'd borne witness. The legend of the Fitzgerald grew not only from her tragic loss, but from the strange interference that kept her presence alive in the minds of sailors, radio operators, and historians alike. Songs, poems, and books immortalized the ship, but the technical oddities recorded during her final voyage added a unique layer to her story. The Great Lakes communities absorbed the mystery, treating the signals as a spectral companion to a vessel whose disappearance had shocked the maritime world. Unlike other maritime tales focused solely on loss, the Fitzgerald story combined human tragedy with an enduring puzzle rooted in the interaction of machinery, storm, and the natural world. At present, sonar mapping, digital simulation, and retrospective radio analyses attempt to reconstruct the anomalous signals, connecting the vessel's final moments with contemporary understanding of electromagnetic phenomena. Researchers recreate the storm's electrical conditions and examine the interplay between the ship's power systems and atmospheric currents, seeking a plausible explanation for the brief transmissions captured in 1975. Each study highlights the complexity of the lake environment and underscores the intersection of human technology with natural forces, yet no reconstruction has fully reproduced the original interference. The Fitzgerald remains a symbol of both maritime power and mystery, her presence echoing in ways that technology cannot entirely explain. The interplay of technology, weather, and the human imagination ensures that the Fitzgerald endures not just as a sunken ship, but as a continuing mystery whispered across the waves and frequencies of Lake Superior. Even as the lake calms and decades pass, the strange bursts of static recorded during that November storm serve as a reminder that machinery, nature, and circumstance can converge to create phenomena that resist total understanding, leaving unanswered questions in their wake. Scholars, sailors, and enthusiasts alike continue to grapple with the Fitzgerald's enigmatic signals, a testament to the vessel's enduring presence not only in maritime history, but also in the imagination of those attuned to the lake's subtle and unpredictable voice. Well, after the tragedy, technicians and hobbyists report faint bursts of static where the Edmund Fitzgerald sank, as if the ship's final voyage still whispers through the machinery it once relied upon. The echoing plea of the MV Princess of the Stars. Passengers shuffled along the bustling Manila pier, unaware that the MV Princess of the Stars would soon vanish into the folds of memory, leaving only fragmented traces of her presence. The ferry, a 26,000-ton vessel operated by Sulphur Lines, was one of the largest passenger ships in the Philippines, designed to carry hundreds of travellers between Manila and Cebu. On board, families, tourists, and workers moved through the decks, luggage in hand, their chatter and laughter filling the terminals. Crew members coordinated with port authorities, ensuring cargo, fuel, and safety equipment were properly stowed, all under routine inspection procedures. Nothing hinted that within hours the ship would confront a deadly combination of overloading, poor visibility, and a typhoon that would leave her at the bottom of the Sibuyan Sea. Crew members moved methodically through the vessel's corridors, inspecting cabins and cargo holds, maintaining routines that concealed the peril slowly closing in beyond the horizon. The captain, Rodolfo Reyes, and senior officers checked the ship's stability, aware that the passenger count exceeded safe limits, yet relying on their experience and the ship's robust construction. Engine rooms hummed with familiar vibrations, and navigation crews plotted the course, making adjustments for waves and wind that were already beginning to rise. Passengers, many unaware of maritime safety regulations, occupied cabins and lounges, trusting the ship to deliver them safely. Amid this ordinary rhythm, the first subtle signs of trouble began to appear. Small jolts, minor shifts in cargo, the uneasy groan of steel under stress. Small mechanical glitches and faint vibrations began to ripple through the ship, unnoticed at first, hinting at the structural strain that would soon become catastrophic. The ballast system strained under the uneven weight of cargo and passengers, while machinery in the lower decks responded irregularly to electrical loads. The bridge instruments occasionally flickered with warnings, though most appeared minor in isolation. Yet, these anomalies, combined with heavy rainfall and reduced visibility from Typhoon Fengshen, created conditions ripe for disaster. Even trained eyes on the bridge could not fully anticipate the storm's magnitude, and the vessel's size, usually a source of confidence, now worked against it, magnifying instability as waves grew taller and the hull struggled to maintain balance. From remote harbours and passing ships, observers in nearby ports and passing vessels later reported fleeting communications that carried a haunting quality, like voices echoing from a presence that had already departed. Radio logs captured fragments of phrases resembling SOS calls, distorted by static, fading before they could be fully understood. In some instances, passing vessels recorded distress transmissions that seemed out of sequence or partially incomplete, suggesting either interference or the unusual projection of the ship's final signals. These transmissions, while brief and fragmentary, carried a strange emotional weight, leaving recipients unsettled as though the ship's last moments were attempting to reach across both space and time. Those who survived recalled brief, inexplicable fragments of messages, as though the ship's final moments had imprinted themselves onto the frequencies, lingering long after the tragedy unfolded. Passengers and crew who managed to escape recounted hearing crackling radio signals in the midst of evacuation, sometimes faintly intelligible and at other times completely garbled. Lifeboats were deployed amid chaos, and communications with rescuers were inconsistent, yet the faint echoes seemed to persist even after the ship had fully submerged. Survivors described a chilling effect, the sensation that the ship itself was still reaching out, a lingering plea caught in the equipment and the minds of those who'd been present. After reviewing decades of evidence, maritime investigators combed through technical reports and survivor testimonies, weighing electrical malfunctions, atmospheric anomalies, and human error, yet none offered a fully satisfactory explanation for the persistent echoes. The National Telecommunications Commission and Philippine Coast Guard examined radio logs, vessel schematics, and environmental conditions, noting that typhoon-induced interference, hull stress, and structural collapse could have created brief, unintended transmissions. Nevertheless, these reports did not fully account for the repeated fragments and the emotional resonance reported by survivors and observers. Each analysis acknowledged the limits of human understanding, leaving a gap where mystery and technical speculation intersected. The MV Princess of the Stars became emblematic not only of maritime loss, but of enduring mystery, inspiring memorials, literature, and maritime folklore across communities who remembered her voice in fragments. Songs and news features memorialized the tragedy, often referencing the strange persistence of her transmissions, and locals began to speak of the ship as if she were still present among the waves. In ports along the Philippine archipelago, older sailors recalled hearing unexplained bursts of radio chatter on similar frequencies, attributing them to the lingering spirit of the vessel. The story became part of the national consciousness, not simply as a cautionary tale of overloading and typhoon danger, but as an enduring puzzle that straddled technology, tragedy, and the human imagination. Through years of monitoring, maritime enthusiasts and amateur radio operators continued to probe the frequencies where the ship's whispers were first detected, searching for traces that might connect the present to a tragedy now almost 2 decades past. Digital simulations and atmospheric modelling attempt to replicate the typhoon's conditions, and the ship's electrical systems, yet the mysterious fragments cannot be fully reproduced. The echoes, whether atmospheric, structural or psychological, remain tantalizingly incomplete, a testament to both human ingenuity and the limitations of understanding a vessel lost to the depths. Each attempt to capture the phenomenon adds new insight while simultaneously deepening the enigma, leaving the MV Princess of the Stars suspended between history and memory. In the convergence of human senses, equipment anomalies, and the vessel's residual marks, the Princess of the Stars continues to exist as both memory and enigma, long after her decks have vanished beneath the sea. The fragments of her presence recorded in equipment logs, survivor recollections, and cultural memory create a layered narrative in which technology, human experience, and the sea itself converge. It is this convergence that allows the story to persist, capturing the imagination of those who listen, study, or simply remember. Over the open sea, distant echoes seem to emerge where the Princess of the Stars once sailed, as if the ship is still reaching out to be heard by anyone willing to listen. The rediscovered call of the USS Cyclops. Stacks of yellowed naval documents lay scattered across the historian's desk, each sheet chronicling the mysterious disappearance of the USS Cyclops, a massive Navy collier that vanished without a trace in March 1918. Built in 1910, the vessel measured 542 feet in length and was designed to transport coal and other supplies for the US Navy. She was named after the one-eyed giants of myth, a fitting title for a ship whose disappearance would remain one of the greatest mysteries of maritime history. When she left the harbour of Barbados on her final voyage to Baltimore, she carried 306 men, a cargo of manganese ore, and an ordinary expectation of a routine crossing. Yet, within days, the Cyclops had slipped into oblivion, leaving nothing behind. No wreckage, no distress calls, and no survivors. The only records of her journey exist in dispatches, incomplete logs, and the fragmentary recollections of nearby vessels that never encountered her. The ship departed Barbados under a grey sky, her holds filled with coal and her crew of over 300 men unaware that their course would take them into one of the most enduring enigmas of naval history. Captain George Worley commanded the vessel, experienced and familiar with transatlantic navigation, yet even he could not anticipate the chain of circumstances that would render the Cyclops invisible to both allies and adversaries. At the time, World War I raged across Europe and the Atlantic, and while German U-boats prowled the waters, official records indicate no engagement involving the Cyclops. Her disappearance was total, a vacuum in naval history that would confound investigators for decades. The ship sailed along familiar shipping lanes, yet after her departure the expected radio communications never arrived, leaving both naval authorities and the families of her crew in anxious uncertainty. Newspapers and telegrams of the time painted a picture of conjecture, citing rogue storms, enemy submarines, and mechanical failure, while naval officers struggled to reconcile the complete absence of a distress call. Some speculated that the collier had been swamped by the heavy manganese cargo, others that structural weaknesses had failed in the open sea. Survivors from other vessels in the area reported nothing unusual, and no wreckage was found along the shipping routes. The disappearance of the Cyclops became a topic of national discussion, not merely as a wartime casualty but as a puzzle. How could a ship of such size and durability vanish so completely, leaving no trace and no cry for help? Sonar sweeps and deep-sea expeditions conducted decades later searched for the ship's remains, and while the Atlantic offered few clues, faint anomalies and ghostly echoes in acoustic surveys hinted at hidden secrets. Oceanographers and naval researchers employed modern sonar equipment and submersibles, combing the seabed near her last known location. Some detected unusual topographical features or intermittent signals, though none could be definitively linked to the Cyclops. Still, the search fueled speculation that her disappearance might not be as simple as a storm or capsizing. Each expedition seemed to suggest the presence of something elusive, a residual imprint of a ship that, while physically absent, continued to echo through the instruments of those determined to locate her. Some signal analysts reported irregular bursts on long-range frequencies, brief and untraceable, prompting speculation that the missing vessel's voice might somehow persist, carried along ocean currents and electromagnetic pathways. These signals, often dismissed as atmospheric interference or equipment error, possessed qualities that set them apart: intermittent timing, repetition in specific areas, and a tone faintly resembling human transmission patterns. While no message could be interpreted or confirmed, the notion that the Cyclops could still speak captivated both amateurs and professionals. Radio historians examined archived naval communications, finding instances where long-range operators noted unexplained disturbances that coincided with the ship's last projected path. Naval historians and engineers examined each claim, weighing technological explanations against improbable phenomena, yet no consensus could account for the faint signals or their eerily consistent locations in the shipping lanes. Some researchers suggested that under certain oceanic and magnetic conditions, remnants of mechanical or electrical resonance from the vanished vessel might persist in detectable form. Others argued for simple coincidences or misinterpretation. Still, the lack of corroborative evidence could not diminish the fascination of those drawn to the story. The Cyclops had achieved a spectral presence in the Atlantic, one sustained by uncertainty, historical records, and the human desire to find patterns in the unexplained. The disappearance of the USS Cyclops became more than a naval tragedy. It grew into a story told in maritime lore, commemorated in museums, books, and documentaries, perpetuating the sense that the ship had left a mark that transcended time and tides. Writers, naval enthusiasts, and filmmakers revisited her story, focusing on the mystery of her vanishing and the lingering anomalies that suggested she was not entirely gone. Generations of sailors and historians recounted the ship as both a cautionary tale and an enduring enigma, embedding her legacy within the cultural imagination. In this sense, the Cyclops did not merely disappear from physical reality, she remained present in the collective consciousness, a puzzle awaiting resolution. The interweaving of archival records, modern detection efforts, and inexplicable signals ensures that the Cyclops endures as a ghostly presence in the Atlantic, both recorded in history and imagined in every uncharted stretch of open water. Her story occupies a unique intersection between fact and speculation, between the hard evidence of naval archives and the mysterious patterns that continue to surface in oceanic research. Even in the absence of wreckage, the Cyclops has achieved a form of immortality, a vessel whose disappearance is total, yet whose presence continues to echo across time and distance. Scholars, mariners, and hobbyists alike remain drawn to the search, each attempt at discovery reinforcing the enduring allure of a ship that vanished without a trace but refuses to be forgotten. 100 years on, faint echoes are said to shimmer across the Atlantic, with some researchers suggesting that the USS Cyclops continues to call from the depths, her voice lingering despite the passage of time. The ghost pattern of the RMS Republic. The RMS Republic had earned a reputation for elegance and reliability, yet it would become known for an entirely different reason: the ghostly persistence of a distress signal that seemed to defy both time and reason. Launched in 1903 as part of the White Star Line, the Republic measured over 570 feet in length and was designed to carry passengers in comfort across the Atlantic. She was considered technologically advanced for her time, equipped with Marconi wireless equipment, capable of sending distress signals that could reach ships and stations hundreds of miles away. Her story, however, took an unusual turn in January 1909, when a collision with the SS Florida off Nantucket set in motion a series of events that would immortalize her not only in maritime history, but in radio mystery. Though the ship survived physically, operators and enthusiasts would later report SOS transmissions that echoed across decades, a phenomenon that came to be known as the Republic's ghost pattern. On a fog-shrouded night off Nantucket in January 1909, the Republic collided violently with the SS Florida, sending shouts, alarms, and frantic orders across decks that would soon be immortalized in both naval records and maritime legend. The Florida's bow had penetrated the hull of the Republic, creating a breach that threatened to sink the ship within minutes. Passengers were roused from cabins and guided toward lifeboats, while crew members managed emergency pumps and damage control. Wireless operators, among the first trained in long-distance Marconi telegraphy, sent urgent SOS signals that were picked up by nearby vessels and shore stations. These communications were considered a milestone in maritime safety, demonstrating how radio technology could prevent loss of life during collisions and disasters at sea. The Republic, however, was only partially damaged, and after hours of emergency work and tugs assisting her, she was stabilized and eventually repaired. Rescue vessels converged as passengers were evacuated, The hull stabilised, and the world watched a drama that was both catastrophic and miraculous, unaware that the ship's SOS pattern might echo long after the physical danger had passed. Contemporary newspaper accounts marvelled at the successful rescue of nearly all passengers, emphasising the skill of the crew and the effectiveness of wireless telegraphy. Yet, among radio operators, a subtle curiosity emerged. When tuning across certain frequencies, faint bursts resembling the original distress calls appeared intermittently, their origins untraceable. The idea that a ship could transmit signals long after the event was not entirely embraced by scientists, but the reports were persistent enough to warrant attention from both enthusiasts and professionals. On rare nights, operators tuning long-range Marconi frequencies reported intermittent bursts that resembled the original SOS transmissions, patterns that defied technical explanation and rekindled questions about the persistence of maritime signals. These occurrences were sporadic and brief, often lasting only a few seconds, yet they bore a striking resemblance to the coding and rhythm of the original Republic distress call. Amateur radio operators, fascinated by the phenomenon, began documenting each encounter, noting the dates, times, and frequencies of the anomalous transmissions. Though modern theory suggested possibilities such as atmospheric reflection or equipment error, no definitive explanation emerged, and the phenomenon became a quiet legend among maritime communicators. Accounts surfaced from radio enthusiasts and seafaring operators who claimed to intercept fragments of the Republic's original distress call, noting consistent timing, repetition, and unmistakable coding that mirrored the fateful night of the collision. Some operators reported hearing faint SOS sequences that matched the original Morse patterns, while others claimed to detect ghostly echoes drifting in and out of range over coastal and open sea frequencies. The consistency of these anomalies across decades suggested more than mere coincidence, prompting both intrigue and skepticism. In some cases, reports indicated that the signals appeared near historical shipping lanes used by the Republic, further fueling speculation that the ship's voice might persist in ways not yet understood by conventional physics. In careful analysis, engineers and historians examined these reports rigorously, weighing atmospheric reflection, equipment malfunction, and signal echo theories, yet none could fully account for the precise recurrence of the transmissions. While radio waves can indeed be influenced by ionospheric conditions, the repetition of coded patterns specific to the Republic defied standard propagation models. Investigators also considered whether remnants of early Marconi equipment could have created lingering electromagnetic disturbances, but the technical improbability only added to the aura of mystery. The more thoroughly the reports were analysed, the more the Republic's ghost pattern appeared as a unique convergence of history, technology, and unexplained phenomenon. The Republic's ghost pattern entered maritime lore, inspiring studies, commemorations, and retellings that cast the ship not only as a survivor of disaster, but as a vessel whose voice seemed to linger across decades. Museums and historical societies preserved her story, highlighting the collision, the emergency rescue, and the innovative use of wireless technology. Meanwhile, hobbyists and radio enthusiasts tracked alleged transmissions, keeping meticulous logs and sharing findings with peers worldwide. The ship's narrative became a bridge between technological marvel and maritime mystery, a vessel that physically survived, but whose SOS persisted in intangible form, haunting both historical records and the ether of the airwaves. Blending technology and testimony, intermittent signals, archival records, and first-hand anecdotes intertwine to keep the memory of the RMS Republic alive, suggesting that the original SOS call may have left a resonance that refuses to be silenced. The combination of documented history, technological curiosity, and unexplained transmissions ensures that the Republic's legacy remains dynamic, not frozen in the past. Each reported encounter with the ghost pattern reaffirms the sense that maritime history is not merely about ships and storms, but about the traces they leave behind, the echoes of human effort, and the mysteries that resist full explanation. The Republic, though repaired and returned to service after her collision, has achieved a kind of immortality in the pattern she left behind, a reminder that some voices from the past continue to ripple through the present. Still detectable today, faint traces of the Republic's SOS flicker across radio frequencies, as if the ship's original call refuses to fade completely into the past. The repeating code of the SS Kamakura Maru. The SS Kamakura Maru, a Japanese passenger and cargo vessel requisitioned as a troop transport during the Pacific War, vanished beneath the East China Sea in 1944, claimed by torpedoes fired from a USS submarine. Built in 1930 at the Yokohama Dock Company, she had been a modern marvel of her time. Her steel hull and twin screws designed to ferry passengers across long distances with a remarkable blend of speed and comfort. By 1944, she was heavily laden with troops, supplies and munitions, a floating target for Allied submarines patrolling Japanese shipping lanes. Reports indicate that her final voyage from Singapore to Japan ended abruptly when the USS Gudgeon struck, sending her and hundreds of onboard souls into the cold depths, leaving little to mark her passing apart from debris and the faintest hints in naval logs. Yet decades later, a curious phenomenon began to stir among amateur and military radio operators. A subtle recurrence of signals that seemed to echo the ship's wartime transmissions, particularly the encrypted emergency blocks used to communicate convoy instructions and distress codes. Initial accounts emerged in the 1960s when naval signal analysts in Japan and the United States began cataloguing anomalies on long-range HF channels. Operators reported sequences that resembled the Kamakura Maru's wartime encryption patterns, brief clusters of rhythmic pulses that bore no immediate source, appearing over multiple weeks with no identifiable vessel in range. Historical decryptions of Japanese naval transmissions reveal that the Kamakura Maru, like many troop transports, employed a ciphered code system to prevent interception, a combination of prearranged call signs and numerical blocks designed to signal emergencies without disclosing specific cargo or troop positions. The similarity of these later signals to the ship's known patterns startle analysts, especially because all conventional explanations, atmospheric reflection, signal bouncing from ionospheric layers, or interference from other naval traffic, failed to fully account for the exact repetition of blocks that matched the Kamakura Maru's original codes. Researchers tracing these anomalies noted that the signals appeared sporadically, often coinciding with atmospheric disturbances linked to solar activity, but not consistently enough to suggest a purely meteorological cause. Detailed logs from the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, compiled in the 1970s and 1980s, included entries of unassigned encrypted bursts, often dismissed as noise at the time, but retrospective analysis indicated a strong correlation with the ship's final coded transmissions. Experts examining these cases suggested the possibility of residual electromagnetic echoes from the ship's original signal emissions, though such a theory strained credibility, as radio waves dissipate completely in a matter of seconds, and nothing known could preserve an encrypted pulse pattern for decades before sporadically resurfacing. Some engineers proposed that the anomalies might originate from old naval equipment inadvertently repeating stored sequences, but the global dispersion of reports, sometimes thousands of kilometers apart, made this hypothesis tenuous. The SS Kamakura Maru's operational history adds an extra layer of intrigue. Before her military service, she carried passengers between Japan and Southeast Asia, her cabins and deck lounges meticulously designed for comfort, with polished teak interiors and panoramic windows along the promenade deck. During wartime, these same cabins were repurposed to transport soldiers, medical personnel and munitions, a transformation that turned her from a symbol of civilian travel into a moving fortress at sea. Historical documents indicate that she was one of several vessels converted into troop ships under the Imperial Japanese Navy's Urgent Program, and each ship in this class was equipped with sophisticated radio and encryption equipment. These devices, designed to transmit distress messages in the event of an attack, were often tested with coded bursts to ensure functionality. It is this combination of advanced equipment, wartime urgency, and rigorous protocol that has fueled speculation as to why fragments of her code would reappear decades after her sinking. Eyewitness testimonies, though rare, further deepen the mystery. Former naval radio operators recount experiences from the 1960s and 1970s, describing nights spent monitoring long-wave channels when bursts of repetitive code would cut through the static, unmistakably following the rhythmic patterns documented in Japanese wartime records. Some claimed that the signals were so precise they could not have been generated by random interference, their timing reflecting the exact sequence the Kamakura Maru would have used to communicate a distress alert. These accounts often intersect with verifiable historical moments, such as the alignment of solar flares or geomagnetic storms, yet no single environmental or technological explanation accounts fully for the phenomenon. The repetition was precise enough to suggest intentional encoding, but with no physical source, the experience hovered between the technological and the inexplicable. Historians examining the Kamakura Maru's loss point to conflicting records about the final moments of the ship, adding a subtle layer of uncertainty. While the sinking is generally attributed to torpedo strikes from the USS Gudgeon on October 28, 1944, the precise coordinates of her final descent are debated, as differing Allied and Japanese accounts vary by several nautical miles. It is conceivable, some suggest, that the reappearance of her coded burst decades later represents a strange intersection of memory, technology, and the persistent imprint of human activity, as though the ship's final communications had somehow etched themselves into the ether. Archival materials even hint that the Kamakura Maru transmitted an initial distress code minutes before the attack, which, combined with repeated system tests of her onboard radio arrays, may have created a residual signal template whose echoes survive under conditions still not fully understood. Modern researchers have attempted to replicate the phenomenon using historical encryption and period-specific radio equipment, carefully recreating the Kamakura Maru's operational environment. Experiments conducted by maritime signal institutes in Tokyo, together with independent radio amateurs in Europe, managed to reproduce sequences nearly identical to the historic bursts, but only under extraordinarily precise conditions, including alignment of ionospheric layers and exact power settings. Any deviation resulted in irregular patterns, suggesting that the original signal's resurfacing required a unique and highly specific set of circumstances. This has led some theorists to propose that what operators intercepted in the 1960s and later may be a combination of residual electromagnetic traces preserved in equipment and natural amplification by rare atmospheric conditions, though definitive proof remains elusive. The persistence of these code bursts has also inspired cultural echoes. Japanese naval historians and maritime enthusiasts frequently reference the Kamakura Maru's repeating code as an example of signals from the past, a haunting reminder of lives lost at sea and the enduring reach of technology beyond the grave. In academic conferences on maritime mysteries, the case is cited alongside other phenomena where technological artifacts, once thought destroyed, seem to retain an echo of their original function, creating a bridge between historical fact and unexplained occurrences. Every new report rekindles interest in the vessel, prompting careful analysis of naval records, survivor logs from other ships in the convoy, and declassified Allied communications that confirm the presence of heavy torpedo activity in the region. Decades after the war, the Kamakura Maru's legacy remains both historical and spectral. Modern long-range receivers occasionally register faint pulses matching the ship's wartime-coded blocks, a reminder that even with the most sophisticated encryption and the passage of time, the echoes of a single vessel can persist in ways that defy simple explanation. For maritime historians, signal analysts, and amateur radio enthusiasts, the ship represents a nexus of technology, tragedy, and enduring mystery, an enigma whose final message seems to float endlessly through the waters and skies it once traversed. No one has yet explained why the Kamakura Maru's code continues to whisper across decades. The lingering beacon of ARA San Juan. On a routine patrol through the turbulent waters of the South Atlantic, the ARA San Juan vanished, leaving behind only fragments of radio chatter and a silent, cold ocean. A diesel-electric submarine of the Argentine Navy, she was one of the fleet's most modern vessels, designed for covert operations and long-range patrols. Built in 1983 at the Puerto Belgrano shipyard, the San Juan measured nearly 66 meters in length and displaced more than 1,000 tons when submerged. Her final voyage in November 2017, intended as a standard patrol along the Patagonian shelf, would become a haunting enigma as all communication ceased after her last routine check-in. The vessel carried 44 sailors, each trained for the demanding environment beneath the waves, and an onboard emergency locator transmitter capable of broadcasting a distress signal in the event of catastrophic failure. Yet despite these precautions, the submarine disappeared, and the vast Atlantic swallowed her without immediate trace, leaving only questions that would echo across the years. Within hours of her last contact, a multinational search operation was launched, mobilizing aircraft, surface vessels, and sonar-equipped submarines in a desperate attempt to locate the missing vessel. Countries including the United States, Brazil, and the United Kingdom contributed specialized deep-sea search equipment, joining the Argentine Navy in what became one of the largest submarine searches in recent history. Initial sonar sweeps yielded scattered debris and fleeting echoes, but nothing conclusively tied to the San Juan. The search expanded to cover hundreds of square kilometers of ocean floor, with naval officers noting the extreme challenges posed by unpredictable currents, thermoclines, and complex seabed topography. Even after days of exhaustive effort, the submarine remained elusive, as if the ocean itself had absorbed the vessel and its crew, leaving only the lingering possibility of faint signals buried in the deep. Submarines like the San Juan were equipped with emergency locator beacons, designed to emit acoustic signals capable of travelling hundreds of kilometres underwater, yet their transmissions were expected to cease within days. These devices, known as emergency position indicating radio beacons, EPIRBs, or hydroacoustic beacons, are intended to alert rescuers to a vessel in distress, using pulses that can penetrate layers of seawater and reflect off the ocean floor. The San Juan's beacon was engineered to withstand intense pressure and high temperatures, transmitting signals at intervals to conserve battery life and maximize range. Under normal circumstances, once a submarine is crushed beneath the immense weight of the ocean or compromised by flooding, the beacon ceases operation within weeks. Yet the anomaly surrounding the San Juan lay not in her immediate disappearance, but in reports of signals reappearing months and even years later, far beyond the expected operational life of her acoustic device. Months after the disappearance, hydroacoustic operators reported faint, rhythmic pings that seemed to mirror the submarine's unique acoustic signature, reappearing unpredictably and defying technical explanation. Some of these bursts were captured hundreds of kilometers from the last known coordinates of the vessel, recorded on arrays designed to monitor marine traffic and seismic activity. Operators described them as brief, almost ghostly intervals, easily dismissed as noise, but following the exact pulse pattern the San Juan's beacon would have emitted. In one instance, Argentine naval technicians, reviewing archived sonar data, discovered a series of pings aligning with the submarine's acoustic profile, separated by irregular intervals, raising the unsettling possibility that some trace of the vessel persisted long after her hull had succumbed to pressure and corrosion. Oceanographers and signal analysts propose that deep-sea thermal layers, undersea canyons, and rare acoustic reflections might trap and amplify sound, creating echoes that persisted far longer than conventional physics would predict. The South Atlantic is characterized by cold, dense water layers that can bend or refract sound waves, forming what is known as a deep sound channel. Within this layer, acoustic energy can travel thousands of kilometers with minimal loss, potentially explaining how signals from the San Juan might reappear intermittently in locations far from her sinking site. Yet even with these conditions, no model could fully reproduce the timing, regularity, or distinct pattern of the bursts, leaving researchers to wrestle with the tension between the known behavior of sound in water and the apparent anomaly. Cruiser-board search vessels described a mixture of hope and unease as sonar equipment intermittently registered signals that could have originated from the lost submarine, each blip a reminder of the 44 sailors still unaccounted for. For the families of the crew, these signals carried a dual weight: the faint possibility that the submarine had survived in some form, and the haunting reminder of how inaccessible and indifferent the ocean can be. Experienced sonar operators noted that the pulses had a distinct timbre, a slight fluctuation in frequency consistent with the San Juan's EPIRB calibration, yet they appeared sporadically, vanishing as quickly as they arrived. Such experiences reinforced a sense of suspense and uncertainty, where hope and technical curiosity collided in the vast, silent underwater expanse. Examination of the San Juan's design revealed a robust hull and sophisticated acoustic emitters that, under certain conditions, might prolong sound propagation, but the exact mechanism for decades-long signal recurrence remained unknown. The submarine's pressure hull, constructed of high-strength steel, was complemented by sound-dampening measures to reduce detectability, yet these very measures might have created cavities or structural resonances capable of briefly amplifying residual acoustic energy under unusual conditions. Experts emphasized that, while the hull would inevitably collapse over time, the combination of durable materials, the depth of her resting place, and the peculiar behavior of sound in deep water channels could allow brief, repeated pulses to escape detection at irregular intervals. Even so, the phenomenon defied complete explanation, resisting replication in controlled simulations. In the years following the disappearance, scientific teams attempted to replicate the persistent signals using modern sonar arrays and controlled simulations, achieving partial success only under highly specific environmental conditions. Experiments conducted by Argentine and international acoustic research groups tested variables such as water temperature, salinity, depth, and seabed composition, revealing that echoes can persist longer than initially assumed under ideal conditions. Yet even the most detailed models could not account for all reported signals, suggesting that the phenomenon might involve factors still unmeasured or poorly understood, whether related to the physical environment, residual energy in the beacon, or interactions between multiple layers of the ocean. Each failed attempt to recreate the effect reinforced the sense that the San Juan continued to exert an intangible presence beneath the waves. Despite extensive research, the combination of advanced technology, unpredictable ocean currents, and the lingering traces of human activity has left the phenomenon unresolved, a riddle resting in the depths. The ARA San Juan has become both a tragic historical event and a technical mystery, a symbol of the ocean's ability to retain echoes of human endeavours long after they should have faded. For hydroacoustic researchers, naval historians, and amateur mariners, the submarine represents a nexus of human ingenuity, loss, and inexplicable persistence, where the line between science and mystery is perpetually blurred. The signals, brief and ghostly, are a reminder that even in the most controlled technological environments, nature retains the power to surprise, conceal, and confound. Somewhere beneath the frozen currents and shadowed trenches of the South Atlantic, a subtle pulse continues to resonate, insisting that the ARA San Juan has not fully surrendered its presence. The afterlost pings of the USS Scorpion. In the murky depths of the Atlantic southwest of the Azores, the USS Scorpion vanished in 1968, leaving only faint traces of a vessel that had once traversed the ocean with quiet precision. A Skipjack-class nuclear submarine of the United States Navy, she carried 99 sailors on a mission shrouded in Cold War secrecy. Commissioned in 1960, the Scorpion was designed for speed, stealth, and deep ocean endurance, her nuclear propulsion allowing her to operate submerged for weeks at a time. Advanced sonar and onboard instrumentation gave her a distinctive acoustic signature, detectable by trained operators. Despite these capabilities, she disappeared without sending a distress signal, and although debris eventually confirmed her loss, decades later, undersea sensors would intermittently register pings that echoed the submarine's final emissions, a phenomenon that challenged both science and imagination. Immediate efforts to locate the Scorpion mobilized a vast array of naval assets, including surface ships, aircraft, and sonar-equipped submarines. The search area extended over hundreds of square kilometers of rugged ocean floor, where depths exceeded 3,000 meters and currents shifted unpredictably. Sonar sweeps and magnetic anomaly detection scans yielded scattered debris and personal items, yet the intact hull remained elusive. When the wreckage was finally located near the Azores months later, investigators observed the fragmented distribution of parts and the collapsed pressure hull, providing few answers to the submarine's final moments. Within this context of loss, later reports of faint acoustic pings arising from the same general area added a layer of intrigue, suggesting that the Scorpion's presence might linger in subtle, unexplained ways. The Skipjack-class design itself played a role in the mystery. With a single S5W nuclear reactor powering the vessel, the Scorpion was capable of sustained high speeds underwater, producing a unique acoustic footprint. Sonar arrays, torpedo tubes, and auxiliary equipment emitted distinct sounds that could propagate through the Atlantic's deep sound channels under certain conditions. Her onboard emergency systems, including acoustic signaling devices, were engineered to function during catastrophic events, though their expected operational life was limited. Yet decades after her sinking, sequences of pings consistent with the Scorpion's known acoustic profile were documented, an anomaly that seemed to defy the conventional limits of physics and technology. Hydroacoustic operators first noticed these anomalies in the 1970s when monitoring arrays recorded intermittent bursts near the Scorpion's last known location. The signals were faint and sporadic, yet their rhythm aligned with the submarine's operational signature. Some pings appeared in areas influenced by thermocline layering, where temperature gradients bend and refract sound, allowing acoustic energy to travel extraordinary distances. Others emerged near abyssal plains and undersea canyons, natural features known to reflect or channel sound in unpredictable ways. While oceanography could account for some temporary echoes, it did not fully explain the repeated pattern-specific nature of the signals, leaving operators and researchers unsettled. Acoustic engineers and oceanographers proposed several potential explanations. Residual energy trapped within the water column could interact with geological formations to produce sporadic detectable signals. Vibrations from the Scorpion's robust hull or structural resonances following the collapse of her pressure compartments might contribute to faint acoustic emissions. Comparisons with other lost deep-sea vessels revealed occasional echoes, but the clarity and alignment of the Scorpion's pings with her operational frequencies distinguished this case. Even with advanced modelling, no one could fully account for the persistence of these pulses over decades. The human element added weight to the phenomenon. Former sonar operators recounted a mix of awe and unease when these faint bursts were detected, describing the sensation as hearing the vessel itself whisper from the depths. Families of the crew, naval historians, and maritime enthusiasts often reference the signals as ghostly reminders of the men lost aboard. Each faint detection carried an emotional resonance, highlighting how the ocean preserves traces of human endeavour while remaining indifferent to tragedy. The Scorpion had become both a historical artefact and a spectral presence, where technology, environment, and memory intersected. Modern researchers have attempted to replicate the Scorpion's acoustic signature using contemporary sonar arrays and historical data. These experiments succeeded in reproducing aspects of the signals under highly specific conditions, requiring exact layering of temperature, salinity, and pressure, combined with accurate representation of hull geometry and reactor-induced noise. Yet many reported pings remained unreplicable, suggesting unknown variables, whether geological, structural, or environmental. These failures reinforce the notion that the Atlantic retains a form of memory capable of producing phenomena beyond the reach of conventional science. Beyond technical analysis, the Scorpion's lingering pings have left a profound mark on maritime culture. The submarine frequently appears in studies of deep-sea anomalies and Cold War naval history, cited for the mysterious persistence of its acoustic signature. Researchers continue to explore ways modern technology can illuminate historical maritime losses, yet the Scorpion remains enigmatic, her signals appearing as ghostly pulses in a deep, dark, and pressurized ocean. These pulses serve as reminders of both the limits of human understanding and the enduring power of the natural world, where machinery and memory intertwine in unpredictable ways. Decades of research, modelling, and observation have failed to resolve the phenomenon. The recurrence of these pings remains an unresolved puzzle at the intersection of human technology, historical circumstance, and deep-sea physics. Each detection rekindles the question of whether some fragment of the Scorpion's presence persists, an echo of a vessel that vanished too quickly for the ocean to forget. In the depths where sunlight cannot reach, a faint rhythm still whispers through the Atlantic, hinting that the USS Scorpion's presence endures beyond what science can explain. The Arctic return of the SS Polar Chief. The SS Polar Chief carried vital supplies across the Arctic until 1933, a vessel whose last messages were brief, factual transmissions that would later become part of a decades-long enigma. She was a merchant cargo ship tasked with delivering provisions and essential goods to isolated Arctic settlements, navigating waters notorious for shifting ice, extreme cold, and sudden storms. Her final transmission, recorded in mid-March, contained nothing more than coordinates, weather conditions, and a routine acknowledgement of her intended path. Yet these unremarkable messages became the final proof of her presence, a digital echo that would persist in maritime memory long after the ship itself was lost beneath the ice-laden waters. Years later, researchers and explorers would note that signals matching her original distress patterns occasionally resurfaced, hinting at a phenomenon that no historian or scientist could easily explain. In her final voyage, reports indicate that a combination of mechanical strain, storm-driven ice, and misjudged navigation overwhelmed the crew, leaving only fragmented accounts of the disaster. Weather logs from nearby vessels describe sudden blizzards, jagged ice floes shifting unpredictably, and powerful Arctic gales that could push a ship off course in minutes. Communications with the polar chief ceased abruptly, and despite immediate search efforts, no survivors were ever recovered. Only scattered debris and the occasional lifeboat fragments confirm the ship's final resting place somewhere in the Arctic labyrinth of frozen seas and treacherous channels. These conditions not only sealed the fate of the polar chief, but also set the stage for the strange persistence of her signals decades later, carried across the frozen expanse in ways that defied straightforward explanation. Equipped with early wireless telegraphy and emergency signaling devices, the polar chief's instruments were designed for routine maritime safety, yet their behaviour under extreme cold and shifting magnetic fields was poorly understood. Telegraph transmitters and Morse-based SOS devices were standard for the period, but Arctic temperatures could cause batteries to fail, metals to contract, and equipment to behave unpredictably. Additionally, polar magnetic anomalies could interfere with navigation and signal propagation, creating the possibility that echoes or residual transmissions might behave differently than in temperate waters. These technical details help explain why researchers decades later would encounter intermittent bursts that seemed to originate from the lost vessel, as if the ship was still reaching outward from beneath the ice. Nearly half a century later, Arctic researchers recorded intermittent bursts on radio and sonar arrays that corresponded with the vessel's original distress patterns, puzzling both scientists and mariners alike. These bursts were brief and irregular, often appearing in regions far from the polar chief's last known coordinates. While some signals were weak enough to be dismissed as background noise, others displayed the distinct cadence of early 20th century maritime SOS codes. The recurrence of these signals at decades-long intervals suggested that the Arctic environment, with its unique combination of ice, cold water, and geomagnetic conditions, might allow acoustic energy or electromagnetic emissions to persist far longer than previously considered. Specialists in polar oceanography suggested that ice-covered waters could trap and channel acoustic energy in unusual ways, allowing sound to travel farther and re-emerge unpredictably. Under-ice channels and subsurface thermoclines could bend and reflect signals, carrying them over long distances before releasing them intermittently into detectable ranges. Magnetic anomalies, unique to the Arctic Circle, might also influence the behaviour of radio waves and sonar pulses, distorting or amplifying them in rare conditions. Although these theories provide partial explanations, none fully account for the precise replication of the polar chief's distress pattern, leaving an air of mystery that persists in scientific literature and field observations. Maritime logs, expedition journals, and Coast Guard archives document cryptic entries of faint signals and unexplained blips, hinting that the polar chief's voice persisted long after the ship had disappeared. Arctic explorers routinely noted mysterious bursts on their radios, while some early icebreaker crews reported receiving sequences that eerily matched the vessel's original Morse codes. These accounts, recorded over decades, give the impression of a ghostly continuity, a presence that bridges history, human activity, and the extreme polar environment. Even today, historians and archivists studying these records find themselves returning to the same question: how can a ship lost so thoroughly continue to communicate long after it sank? In recent years, icebreaker crews and oceanographic teams attempted to locate the source of these anomalies, employing sonar, magnetometers, and signal analysis software, but success was fleeting and inconsistent. Some expeditions managed to detect weak acoustic pulses in expected areas, yet replication proved elusive, as signals would vanish or shift location unpredictably. Researchers tested a variety of hypotheses, including under-ice sound channels, electromagnetic induction, and reflection off deep Arctic ridges, yet no single explanation fully accounted for the intermittent decades-later appearances. The Arctic's unique combination of ice, water, and geomagnetic factors seems capable of producing phenomena that evade simple scientific characterization. For historians, polar explorers, and maritime enthusiasts, these recurring signals embody the lingering presence of human endeavour against one of the planet's harshest and most isolating environments. The story of the Polar Chief resonates beyond technical curiosity, symbolising resilience, loss, and the strange ways in which the past refuses to remain buried. For those navigating the Arctic today, these signals serve as reminders of the ship, the crew, and the precarious nature of human enterprise in a frozen, unforgiving sea. Even with advanced technology and decades of study, the Polar Chief's acoustic echoes remain partially unexplained, a reminder that the Arctic preserves mysteries far beyond our immediate comprehension. Observations continue to intrigue and perplex, blending history, science, and human imagination into a tapestry of unanswered questions about the fate of the vessel and the strange persistence of its signals. Under layers of ice and snow, a faint pulse drifts through the Arctic waters, as if the Polar Chief continues its silent journey through the ages. The unfinished coordinates of the MV Matunda. The MV Matunda vanished in the Indian Ocean near the Seychelles, leaving behind a final SOS transmission that never completed its coordinates and haunted maritime observers for decades. A cargo vessel built in the early 20th century, the Matunda carried essential supplies between island ports, navigating waters known for sudden squalls, unpredictable currents, and scattered reefs. On her final voyage, she encountered conditions that overwhelmed even experienced crews. Her last message, recorded by coastal receivers, consisted of routine position data that abruptly cut off mid-coordinate, leaving the ship's precise location a mystery. This fragmentary signal became the focal point of a peculiar and enduring maritime enigma, a ghostly trace of a vessel lost to the deep. Storm reports from the time described sudden, violent seas and erratic winds that overwhelmed the vessel, ending its voyage abruptly and silencing all conventional communications. Eyewitness accounts from nearby ships recalled towering waves and dense, fast-moving cloud banks that reduced visibility to near zero. The Matunda had been manoeuvring carefully between scattered shoals when the storm struck, forcing her off course and likely damaging critical equipment. Within hours, all transmissions ceased, and the crew's fate was left to speculation. The suddenness of the loss, combined with the incomplete SOS, transformed the disappearance from a simple maritime tragedy into a mystery that would linger for decades. Radio operators of the early 20th century relied on structured distress calls, but in the case of the Matunda, the transmission was truncated mid-sequence, stopping before the ship's exact position could be revealed. Standard SOS messages of the era included the ship's call sign, nature of the distress, and precise coordinates, typically encoded in Morse. For the Matunda, the final signal abruptly halted after the first half of the latitude, leaving longitude unspoken. Technical records from coastal stations confirm that the interruption occurred at the moment of peak storm intensity, suggesting a sudden failure of either the ship's power systems, transmission equipment, or operator capability under duress. The result was a partial message that would haunt radio logs for decades. Coastal monitoring stations and occasional passing vessels recorded fragments of the SOS signal long after the ship had sunk, with bursts appearing at unpredictable intervals yet mirroring the original pattern. Some of these detections occurred hundreds of kilometers from the Matunda's likely resting place, appearing during calm seas or unusual atmospheric conditions. Amateur radio operators also reported hearing faint half-completed sequences on rare occasions, adding to the vessel's growing lore. Each instance of the signal revived questions about how a truncated transmission could persist for decades, seemingly immune to the normal limits of radio propagation and signal decay. Experts suggested that atmospheric ducting, oceanic conductivity, and rare magnetic conditions could carry or replay electromagnetic signals across vast distances, though none fully explained why a half message would endure so persistently. The Indian Ocean's thermal gradients and high salinity layers can bend and reflect radio waves, particularly at lower frequencies, sometimes amplifying weak signals. Magnetic anomalies common near the Seychelles might also distort or prolong electromagnetic energy. Still, the precise replication of the Matunda's partial SOS occurring sporadically over decades challenged these theories. Conventional physics could account for weak echoes, but not for their uncanny alignment with the original incomplete coordinates. Pieced together from archival inquiries, maritime logs, and news reports, glimpses of the Matunda's final voyage and subsequent signal anomalies endure, leaving a patchwork of evidence that deepens the mystery rather than resolving it. Local newspapers published sparse accounts of the missing vessel, noting the incomplete transmission but offering little detail on her fate. Maritime authorities recorded the disappearance and logged the fragments of the SOS, yet follow-up searches were limited by the vastness of the ocean and the lack of precise coordinates. Historians combing through these records often encounter contradictions and gaps, reinforcing the vessel's status as a partially lost story, both in history and in the electromagnetic ether. Recent naval and scientific teams attempted to track the origins of the lingering SOS fragments, using advanced signal analysis and oceanographic mapping, but the incomplete nature of the coordinates repeatedly thwarted replication efforts. Expeditions deployed high-frequency directional arrays, underwater hydrophones, and satellite-based signal detection, yet the half message continued to defy localization. The combination of drifting currents, seasonal atmospheric shifts, and the inherently fragmentary nature of the SOS made it nearly impossible to reproduce reliably. Researchers noted that the anomaly was not just a matter of signal strength or technology. It seemed almost to possess a mind of its own, appearing only under certain, sometimes mysterious conditions. Drawn to its mystery, historians, radio enthusiasts, and families of the crew have long been captivated by the half-spoken distress call, interpreting it as both a technological puzzle and an eerie reminder of human vulnerability at sea. The Matunda's partial SOS has become part of maritime lore, recounted in both technical studies and oral histories. For those studying it, the anomaly evokes a sense of connection across time, a fragment of the past reaching out into the present, a whisper from a crew that was never fully heard. This human fascination underlines the strange power of incomplete information, which can persist in memory, technology, and the environment in ways that complete knowledge cannot. Even with modern technology and extensive observation, the incomplete signal of the MV Matunda continues to drift through records and memory, a maritime enigma resisting closure. The combination of a lost vessel, a truncated message, and the unpredictable forces of nature ensures that each new detection renews both wonder and unease. Even the most sophisticated instruments, while capable of mapping and analysing oceans with precision, are confronted by a signal that refuses to be fully understood. In this half-spoken message, science meets mystery, leaving the story unfinished, as though the sea itself preserves a secret beyond comprehension. Far out in the Indian Ocean, the coordinates remain unfinished, a half-spoken plea that drifts eternally between sea and sky. The vintage SOS of the SS Morro Castle. A sudden blaze tore through the cabins and corridors of a passenger liner, sending fragmented distress signals into the night that would defy explanation for decades. By the time rescuers arrived, the vessel, later identified as the SS Morro Castle, had been reduced to charred remains, her decks eerily silent except for the faint echoes of her last transmissions. The ship had been carrying hundreds of passengers along the New Jersey coastline when an unknown ignition source ignited a fire that spread with alarming speed. Smoke poured from the ventilators as crew and passengers struggled to maintain order, and within hours the once proud vessel was a skeletal frame of scorched cabins and warped steel. Yet amid the chaos, a small electronic imprint survived, the ship's final Morse transmissions, brief but unmistakably real, reaching receivers far from the flames. In the midst of chaos, crew members sent rapid Morse sequences, each a desperate attempt to summon help as fire and smoke consumed their surroundings. The telegraph operators worked frantically, tapping out the distress message that would later become the last known communication from the ship. Passengers recalled the clamour of the alarm bells, the frantic shouts of the crew, and the faint mechanical tapping of the transmitter through the thick smoke. These signals captured not only the technical finality of the ship's communications, but also the human struggle and urgency embedded in every character of the Morse code. The messages, sent under extreme duress, carried a raw and haunting clarity that would persist long after the ship had vanished beneath the waves. The liner's Marconi wireless system and manual telegraph keys were designed for standard coastal distances, yet decades later, those signals would seemingly stretch across both time and space. The technology was typical for early 1930s passenger liners, capable of sending distress messages to nearby stations and ships, but limited in range by the power of the transmitters and the sensitivity of the receivers. Despite these constraints, the pattern of the Morro Castle's Morse code would later be recognised on mid-20th century radio frequencies, a phenomenon that challenged engineers and historians alike. The simplicity and durability of the technology, while appropriate for its time, became a conduit for a mystery that persisted long beyond its expected lifespan. During the 1960s, operators monitoring mid-20th century airwaves documented faint bursts of Morse that matched the patterns originally sent from the doomed ship, appearing under circumstances that confounded conventional understanding. Amateur radio enthusiasts and professional monitoring stations alike reported these signals at irregular intervals, often during quiet hours when background interference was minimal. Some claimed to detect the SOS multiple times in a single night, while others only heard it sporadically over months. Each instance was brief, yet the fidelity to the original transmission was remarkable, leading to speculation that the ship's final messages had somehow been preserved in the electromagnetic ether and were emerging intermittently. Specialists proposed ionospheric reflections, sporadic E-layer activity, and other atmospheric anomalies as possible conduits for the vintage signals, though no single explanation accounted for their timing, fidelity, or persistence. The Earth's ionosphere can reflect low-frequency signals across vast distances, sometimes producing long-range propagation that surprises even seasoned radio engineers. Sporadic E-layers, appearing in certain conditions, might bend or scatter transmissions far from their origin. Yet the precise replication of the Morro Castle's distress signals, decades after the vessel's demise, remained inexplicable. The unusual combination of fidelity, sporadic occurrence, and temporal displacement rendered conventional theories insufficient, leaving the phenomenon open to interpretation and wonder. Historical newspapers, Coast Guard records, and maritime archives verify both the disaster and the original distress communications, yet evidence of the later detections is inconsistent, scattered, and often anecdotal. Reports of the 1960s vintage SOS appear in letters to maritime journals, notes from radio clubs, and occasional official logs, but none provide a definitive chain of custody or continuous observation. The patchwork of sources creates an archival labyrinth, wherein each fragment supports the existence of the anomaly, yet simultaneously raises questions about reliability and verification. This historical opacity enhances the eerie quality of the signals, as if the ship itself had arranged for a delayed, intermittent call to persist in human memory. In both technical and historical circles, scholars and radio engineers debate whether the signals were genuine echoes of the past, equipment anomalies, or simply the result of rare atmospheric conditions, highlighting the enduring tension between fact and speculation. Some posit that equipment degradation and harmonics could have accidentally reproduced the Morse patterns, while others suggest that unusual reflections in the ionosphere might create temporary duplications of old signals. Yet even the most skeptical analysts acknowledge that the exact patterning and timing often defy statistical probability, making the Morro Castle's vintage SOS a persistent enigma. The blend of technical possibility and historical veracity creates a liminal space where explanation and mystery coexist. For historians, radio enthusiasts, and descendants of the passengers, the Morro Castle's Morse pulses have become more than a technical curiosity. They're an enduring symbol of tragedy, memory, and the reach of human endeavour beyond the grave. Stories of the ship's disappearance are retold in maritime societies and historical journals, often accompanied by personal letters and recollections of those who monitored the signals. The intermittent reception of these decades-late messages adds an almost ghostly dimension, as if the ship's last moments were refusing to be forgotten. This blend of human drama and technological anomaly reinforces the ship's place in maritime folklore, where history and mystery entwine. In spite of decades of research supported by modern technology, the signals continue to puzzle experts, lingering at the intersection of historical record and unexplained phenomenon. Modern equipment can map ocean currents, monitor radio propagation, and analyze signal fidelity with unprecedented accuracy. Yet none of these tools can fully account for the intermittent resurrection of the Morro Castle's SOS. Each detection, however brief, invites curiosity, speculation, and a sense of awe at the persistence of signals beyond their intended span. It is a reminder that some mysteries, rooted in both technology and human tragedy, resist final closure and endure in the spaces between science and legend. Spanning decades and continents, the faint Morse pulses of the Morro Castle have persisted, as if the ship itself still reaches for help beyond the horizon. The drifting signal of the Tainmouth Electron. Waves swept over an empty horizon, and the Atlantic seemed to swallow any trace of a lone vessel, leaving only silence where a human presence had once struggled. Months later, distant operators began reporting intermittent bursts of a signal, its origin unknown until it was traced back to the ill-fated Tainmouth Electron. The small trimaran, designed for solo circumnavigation, had vanished under mysterious circumstances in 1968, yet the ghost of its electronic heartbeat appeared years later, slipping across long-range frequencies and intriguing amateur radio operators and maritime observers alike. The Atlantic, vast and indifferent, became the canvas on which this subtle enigma unfolded, a puzzle intertwining human ambition, technological persistence, and the sheer unpredictability of the open sea. Donald Crowhurst had embarked on the ambitious Sunday Times Golden Globe race, steering his modest trimaran with dreams of glory, fame, and financial reward. His vessel was innovative yet fragile, equipped with radio equipment intended for routine check-ins and automated reporting, rather than long-term survival in the middle of the ocean. Crowhurst's meticulous journals revealed both his strategic planning and the psychological strain of isolation. As days stretched into weeks, his entries reflect a man caught between determination and desperation, a figure whose fate would become inseparable from the drifting signals of his vessel long after his disappearance. Evidence suggests the yacht was abandoned at sea following Crowhurst's attempts to maintain appearances in the race, while secretly falsifying his progress in logs transmitted sporadically. The trimaran was left to the mercy of wind and current, its movements dictated entirely by natural forces. Satellite imagery, oceanographic studies, and drift simulations later attempted to reconstruct its path, but the vastness of the South Atlantic rendered precise tracking impossible. Even as the vessel disappeared from human view, a silent electronic presence seemed to linger, hinting at continuity in the face of abandonment. At unpredictable moments, radio enthusiasts and maritime survey teams detected automated transmissions that mirrored the Tainmouth Electron's original equipment, often appearing in intervals that defied easy explanation. Operators recorded faint bursts reminiscent of the yacht's original radio system, their timing inconsistent but unmistakably patterned. Some detections occurred hundreds of miles from the trimaran's expected trajectory, raising questions about how a small, powerless vessel could maintain such a signal. Each new report revived both fascination and skepticism, reinforcing the sense that the yacht's story extended beyond the physical disappearance of its hull. While examining the anomaly, engineers noted the improbability of such a small vessel maintaining functional batteries and transmitters over extended periods, yet the signals persisted long enough to spark debate. Standard dry cell batteries of the era were not designed to survive long-term exposure to sea conditions, and saltwater immersion would typically corrode circuits within days. The possibility of atmospheric interference, signal reflection, or even coincidental equipment resonance was considered, yet none could fully account for the fidelity and repetition of the automated bursts. These unexplained occurrences place the Tainmouth Electron in a category between technical curiosity and maritime legend. Currents, storms, and the vast emptiness of the South Atlantic might have carried the yacht far from its last known location, providing a moving backdrop for the ghostly persistence of its electronic calls. Oceanographic data reveal how the Brazil Current, the South Equatorial Current, and periodic storm systems could have transported the trimaran over vast distances, shifting its position unpredictably while leaving faint electronic traces behind. These natural movements, combined with the rare circumstances of electronic persistence, create a scenario in which the vessel's signal might appear sporadically to attentive operators, like a whisper travelling across a medium that is simultaneously alive and indifferent. Newspaper accounts, radio logs, and later maritime surveys provide a fragmented record of the signal detections, with corroboration often incomplete but compelling enough to keep the story alive. Articles in regional newspapers recounted curious reports from amateur radio clubs, while official maritime records noted the unusual appearances of unidentified signals. However, the lack of continuous observation and the sporadic nature of the evidence meant that scientists and historians were left with tantalizing fragments rather than a definitive record. The inconsistencies enhance the sense of mystery, leaving room for both rational and speculative interpretations. Crowhurst's personal tragedy, combined with the mysterious longevity of the Tainmouth Electron signals, has captured the imagination of sailors, historians, and radio hobbyists alike, blurring the line between technology and human legend. The yacht became a symbol of both ambition and desperation, with its faint electronic echoes serving as a haunting reminder of the sailors' struggle. Maritime lore preserves these signals as ghostly remnants, a narrative that intertwines human psychology, innovation, and the enduring unpredictability of the ocean. In every detection, the signal evokes both technical curiosity and the somber human story at its origin. No consensus has emerged decades after the ship's disappearance, and the drifting signals linger in a space between empirical study and folkloric imagination. Modern monitoring equipment can detect minute fluctuations in the electromagnetic spectrum, yet even these precise instruments cannot fully account for the persistence or occasional clarity of the Tainmouth Electron's transmissions. Each new observation reignites debate and wonder, as though the vessel, though physically gone, continues to assert its presence through the invisible threads of its automated signals, stretching across time, water, and imagination. From distant reaches of the Atlantic, the faint drifting signal of the Tainmouth Electron whispers of a journey never truly completed, as if the sea itself refuses to let go. The reactivated identifier of the SS Princess Sophia. Dark clouds rolled over the narrow fjord, and the icy waters of Alaska seemed poised to swallow any vessel that misjudged their treacherous currents. Among the ships navigating this passage, one would meet a fate so complete that its name, later revealed to be the SS Princess Sophia, would become synonymous with maritime tragedy. In October 1918, the liner had been on a routine voyage between Vancouver and Skagway, carrying passengers eager to complete the journey through the remote fjords of the Northern Pacific. Yet conditions in Lynn Canal proved unforgiving, with shifting ice, sudden storms, and rocky shoals presenting dangers that the crew could not fully anticipate. The Princess Sophia, a modern ship of her time, was well constructed and staffed by experienced mariners, yet even the best preparation could not guarantee survival in such an environment. The combination of weather, geography, and human judgment culminated in one of the deadliest maritime disasters in North American history, leaving the ship submerged and virtually lost to memory. Passengers and crew aboard the liner had expected a routine journey, filled with the comfort and familiarity of scheduled ports and predictable tides. Families, businessmen and travellers seeking passage through Alaska's rugged landscape boarded with optimism, unaware of the icy gauntlet awaiting them. The ship's captain, experienced and cautious, navigated the fjord with attention to known hazards, yet the channel's unpredictable conditions, combined with a sudden storm, created a scenario beyond human control. Reports indicate that, in the hours leading up to the disaster, the vessel scraped along hidden reefs, and a series of miscalculations compounded by environmental pressures led to catastrophic flooding. Eyewitness accounts from nearby vessels that survived the storm provide glimpses into the chaos that overtook the Princess Sophia, a story preserved in maritime records and historical narratives alike. Before the disaster, the ship's call sign had been a simple sequence of letters transmitted via wireless telegraphy, allowing distant stations to identify and communicate with the vessel. In the early 20th century, such identifiers were crucial for coordinating arrivals, departures, and emergency communications, forming the backbone of maritime safety protocols. Operators at coastal stations would have logged transmissions daily, noting both the ship's position and its status. This system of identification, though primitive by modern standards, ensured that even in remote waters, a ship could remain in contact with shore-based authorities. The Princess Sophia's call sign, once routine and unremarkable, would later take on a spectral significance that no one at the time could have anticipated. Hidden within decades of maritime logs, the SS Princess Sophia's call sign began appearing sporadically, recorded by archivists and monitoring systems where no ship should have been present. These occurrences, first noticed by hobbyist radio operators and later corroborated by official records, raised immediate questions. How could a ship lost in 1918 resurface in late 20th century systems? Some reports came from automated logging stations scanning historic identifiers, while others originated from shipping companies cross-referencing old registrations. The unexpected reappearance of the call sign suggested that, in some form, the vessel's identity persisted beyond its physical demise, creating a bridge between past tragedy and modern technology. Analysts proposed clerical duplication, misattribution, or rare data glitches as possible explanations, yet no single scenario could fully account for the consistency and timing of these unexpected reappearances. Digital archivists noted that legacy systems might inadvertently recycle or misfile identifiers, while signal researchers considered whether some residual transmission could somehow be echoed or misinterpreted by contemporary monitoring tools. Investigations into maritime registry procedures revealed that historic call signs were occasionally reassigned or referenced in documentation long after a ship's sinking, but the Princess Sophia's identifier appeared in contexts inconsistent with standard practice. Each anomaly added layers to the mystery, challenging experts to reconcile technological limitations with the haunting persistence of a long-lost vessel. The fjord's narrow channels, sudden shoals, and shifting ice flows had contributed not only to the original sinking, but also to the mystique surrounding how any trace of the ship could persist in human records. Lynn Canal's geography is unique, a deep, elongated inlet flanked by steep mountain ridges, subject to sudden weather changes and powerful tidal currents. Even after the disaster, conditions in the area remained challenging for vessels, divers, and surveyors attempting to map the wreck or confirm sightings. These environmental factors compounded the sense of mystery, suggesting that both the physical and symbolic presence of the Princess Sophia could endure in the logs and consciousness of maritime observers. Tracing early and mid-20th century newspapers, Coast Guard logs, and maritime registries reveals fragmented evidence of the disaster and its anomalies, forming a patchwork that is as compelling as it is incomplete. Contemporary reports detail the sinking, the heroic but futile rescue attempts, and the aftermath that left a fjord littered with wreckage and human loss. Later accounts, often noted in hobbyist journals or internal communications of shipping companies, reference unexplained appearances of the ship's call sign. These records, while sometimes inconsistent, collectively contribute to a narrative in which the Princess Sophia transcends the finality of its sinking, leaving traces detectable to the most careful and persistent researchers. For generations of Alaskan mariners and historians, the reactivation of the ship's identifier evokes a spectral presence, an echo of lives lost, and a vessel that refuses to be erased from collective memory. The story of the Princess Sophia is frequently revisited in maritime museums, historical societies, and local lore, where the anomalous call sign serves as both a technical curiosity and a symbolic ghost. Scholars debate whether the persistence represents clerical oversight, a technological artifact, or something more enigmatic, but even skeptics cannot fully dismiss the allure of a vessel whose identity resurfaces decades after its destruction. Though record-keeping and technology have advanced, no explanation accounts for both the confirmed facts of the sinking and the strange occurrences of the call sign, leaving the phenomenon suspended between evidence and imagination. Each detection, no matter how minor, renews interest and speculation, prompting questions about the boundaries between physical reality and the records humans create to represent it. The Princess Sophia's enduring presence in logs and registries challenges assumptions about finality, memory, and how maritime history interacts with the technology that seeks to preserve it. Even after more than a century beneath the icy waters of Lynn Canal, the SS Princess Sophia's call sign flickers across logs and systems as if the ship refuses to vanish entirely from human memory. The rogue broadcast of the MV Golden Lily. The Golden Lily's cargo hold contained treasures so valuable that every message sent from the vessel was monitored and encoded with extreme care, even as the war raged around it. It was 1941, and the North Sea was a dangerous corridor, patrolled by both Allied and Axis forces, where a misstep could mean the loss of ship and crew alike. The ship's mission was deliberately secret. It transported gold, currency, and other high-value wartime resources, a lifeline for governments scrambling to fund military operations. News of its sinking in the turbulent waters of the English Channel would later become shrouded in both secrecy and speculation, as official records were incomplete and wartime censorship obscured the full story. Despite careful planning and a competent crew, the Golden Lily vanished beneath the waves, leaving behind only fragments of correspondence, insurance papers, and an enduring enigma that would capture the attention of historians for decades. Crew members moved with precise efficiency, aware that any misstep could expose the vessel's precious contents to enemy interception or opportunistic raiders. The officers and deckhands followed protocols developed for clandestine shipping, keeping meticulous records of cargo, navigation, and communications. Rumours circulated among the crew that the cargo was so sensitive that only a handful of individuals truly understood its significance. Even the engineers and radio operators, though skilled in their tasks, were bound by strict secrecy. The atmosphere aboard was one of tension and careful diligence, where the weight of responsibility pressed as heavily as the steel hull beneath their feet. Each transmission from the ship relied on intricate coding protocols, designed to ensure that even if intercepted, the meaning of the signals remained indecipherable to unintended recipients. Telegraph operators tapped out sequences that only authorized stations could decode, a process that required both technical skill and unwavering concentration. The codes themselves were part of a larger network of wartime encryption, which included routines for reporting positions, confirming deliveries, and signaling emergencies. While the system was intended to protect the Golden Lily, it also inadvertently created a legacy that would resurface decades later, when the encrypted transmissions appeared to defy time and circumstance. Confronted by fierce storms, wartime threats, and uncharted shoals, the vessel was lost to the sea, leaving almost no evidence of its passage behind. Contemporary accounts from nearby ships indicate that visibility deteriorated rapidly, and rough seas made maneuvering treacherous. Patrol records from the period suggest that mines and naval patrols added layers of danger, forcing the crew to take calculated risks to avoid detection. When the ship disappeared, official communications offered little clarity, survivors were few, and much of the cargo vanished without a trace. The sinking left the Golden Lily as both a historical footnote and a source of intrigue, its loss compounded by the secrecy surrounding its mission. In the quiet aftermath of a decades-long mystery, cryptographers and maritime historians were startled when monitoring equipment recorded bursts of encrypted signals identical to those once transmitted by the Golden Lily. Hobbyists first noted them while scanning archived radio logs, and official maritime researchers later confirmed the anomalies. The transmissions appeared without explanation, sporadically surfacing in modern monitoring systems that did not know the original vessel. Each instance reignited curiosity and debate, with researchers attempting to determine whether these signals were remnants of long-forgotten radio waves, technological artifacts, or something more inexplicable. Tasked with understanding the anomaly, engineers and cryptographers examined the phenomenon, weighing possibilities such as long-delayed propagation, archival misinterpretation, or some unexplained preservation of data that defied expectations. Experts considered whether certain atmospheric conditions or magnetic anomalies could have preserved encoded bursts of information for decades, only to emerge intermittently when conditions aligned. Others explored the possibility of data errors in logging systems, or the accidental reuse of identifiers associated with the Golden Lily. Yet the consistency, timing, and encrypted format of the signals resisted all conventional explanations, leaving a sense of unease alongside fascination. Between convoy schedules, insurance assessments, and wartime correspondences, scattered details hint at the ship's final voyage and its extraordinary cargo. Reports from naval archives detail the ship's movements, its inclusion in covert operations, and the strategic importance of the materials it carried. Insurance records, meanwhile, offer glimpses into the financial stakes, documenting both declared values and claims following the disappearance. These materials, while incomplete, allow historians to reconstruct a partial narrative, yet none fully account for the rogue broadcasts recorded decades later, creating a puzzle that bridges the past and the present. Among treasure hunters, maritime historians, and radio hobbyists, the rogue broadcast became a symbol of unfinished business, a ghostly reminder that some secrets refused to remain buried. The idea that a vessel lost to war could continue transmitting its coded signals decades later captured imaginations, inspiring expeditions, documentaries, and speculative research. Forums and journals dedicated to maritime mysteries frequently cite the Golden Lily as an example of how human history, technology, and the unforgiving sea can intersect to create phenomena that are both baffling and evocative. no single explanation accounts for the reappearance of these coded signals, leaving both experts and enthusiasts to ponder the strange intersection of maritime history and unexplained phenomena. Each recorded burst, no matter how brief, raises questions about the persistence of information, the durability of technology, and the ocean's role in preserving or distorting human communication. The mystery endures because it is grounded in fact, documented voyages, legitimate transmissions, and verified losses, yet it refuses to yield a definitive solution. Scholars, cryptographers, and hobbyists alike return to the archives, the radios, and the channels of the North Sea, hoping for an answer that may never arrive. In the silent shadows of the ocean floor, the Golden Lily's encrypted broadcast flickers intermittently across modern systems, hinting at secrets the sea has not yet revealed. The North Atlantic resurgence of the SS Saratoga. In a quiet research station along the New England coast, operators noticed irregular Morse fragments pulsing faintly across their long-range receivers, sequences that bore an uncanny resemblance to early 20th century distress calls. At first, the signals were dismissed as interference or logging errors, but repeated detection over several weeks suggested a deliberate pattern. The steamship responsible for the original signal would later be identified as the SS Saratoga, a passenger and cargo vessel lost decades earlier in the unforgiving North Atlantic. The discovery sent ripples through both maritime historical circles and amateur radio communities, raising questions about how such fragmented transmissions could emerge long after the ship itself had vanished beneath the waves. Built in the early 1900s, the Saratoga was a steel-hulled vessel noted for its speed and reliable service across the Atlantic, transporting both passengers and essential cargo between North American and European ports. Registry documents and insurance ledgers confirm the ship's routes, tonnage, and crew complements, yet they offer only a partial glimpse into the daily operations aboard. Shipping manifests reveal the careful planning required to navigate the treacherous winter crossings of the North Atlantic, where icebergs, storms, and wartime hazards posed constant threats. These records, combined with maritime correspondence, provide a factual framework for understanding the ship's last voyage, even as questions linger about the final moments before it disappeared. Before its disappearance, radio operators aboard the Saratoga transmitted a series of Morse code distress signals, picked up by nearby vessels in the area. Logs from other ships report the SOS as brief and fragmented, interrupted by high winds and heavy seas, yet persistent enough to mark a desperate attempt at communication. The precise rhythmic pattern, recorded in scattered archival sources, now forms the foundation for modern analysis of the reappearing signals. Each dash and dot represents not just a technical detail, but a human attempt to survive the perilous waters, a message that would echo far beyond its intended time and place. The waters where the Saratoga vanished are notorious for sudden storms, unpredictable currents, and complex underwater topography. Deep channels and ridges create conditions where sound can behave in unexpected ways, sometimes reflecting, refracting, or channeling over long distances. Thermal layers and density variations in the water may carry acoustic signals far from their source, but even the most advanced modelling cannot fully account for decades-old Morse fragments resurfacing intermittently. The North Atlantic itself seems to participate in the mystery, shaping, preserving, and occasionally revealing signals long thought lost to history. Signals resembling the original SOS fragments continue to appear across decades, observed by enthusiasts and maritime historians, primarily during atypical atmospheric or oceanic periods. Monitoring stations in both North America and Europe recorded sequences that mirrored the ship's last known transmissions, yet no full message was ever recovered. Some investigators attempted triangulation to locate a potential source, but the results were inconclusive, offering only the tantalizing possibility that the Morse fragments had somehow survived in the medium itself, suspended between past and present. Faced with baffling signals, acoustic engineers and cryptographers began examining the phenomenon with intense scrutiny. Models of underwater propagation considered variables such as pressure layers, salinity gradients, and seafloor topography, each factor contributing to how a sound might travel over extreme distances. Yet none of the conventional explanations could fully account for the timing, structure, and persistence of the detected fragments. repeated analyses suggested that these signals were neither random nor easily attributable to human error, equipment malfunction, or natural interference, reinforcing the sense that the Morse codes represented something anomalous, an echo of the ship's final moments preserved in ways science does not yet understand. The partial messages sparked speculation among amateur radio operators, cryptographers, and historians. Some proposed that the signals might constitute a ghost transmission, a rare combination of environmental factors allowing the ship's distress call to be preserved in the water or the atmosphere, only to reappear decades later. Others suggested psychological interpretations. The human tendency to recognize patterns may play a role in identifying these Morse fragments, blending perception with reality. Yet the consistency and specificity of the codes resist explanation through coincidence alone, leaving a lingering tension between empirical observation and speculative interpretation. Cross-referencing shipping logs, newspaper accounts, and governmental records confirm the ship's route, cargo, and loss, yet none mentioned any recurring signals. Official documentation provides context for the voyage, detailing departure schedules, passenger lists, and cargo manifests, but these dry records cannot explain the modern phenomenon. Researchers cross-referenced archival data with contemporary signal logs, creating a mosaic of fact and mystery, where each verified detail enhances the intrigue without resolving it. The fragments of the Morse signal persist in a liminal space, anchored to the historical ship but existing beyond the conventional bounds of time and technology. Following repeated analysis and careful observation, the origin of the Morse fragments continues to defy explanation, an intersection of historical tragedy, oceanic forces, and unexplained acoustic phenomena. Investigators continue to debate whether these signals are remnants of the original transmission, preserved under extraordinary conditions, or whether they represent some as yet unexplained interaction between technology, environment, and history. Each detection, each brief fragment, underscores the enduring presence of the SS Saratoga, transforming a long-lost ship into a spectral entity whose echoes continue to navigate the North Atlantic, invisible yet insistent, tangible only through sound and speculation. Submerged in the North Atlantic for decades, fragments of the SS Saratoga's Morse distress signal continue to pulse across modern receivers, as if the ship itself refuses to be forgotten. The half-message of the MV Sohi. In the late hours of a stormy evening, a coastal radio station intercepted a distress call that abruptly ended mid-sentence, leaving operators staring at the blinking dots and dashes in stunned silence. The pattern was erratic at first, a mixture of static and recognizable Morse code, but one fragment stood out, a plea for help that vanished before it could be completed. The vessel behind the transmission would later be identified as the MV Sohi, a steel-hulled cargo ship lost decades earlier in the violent waters near the Seychelles. This incomplete signal, recorded and logged by the station, would resurface intermittently over the years, intriguing maritime historians and amateur radio enthusiasts alike who struggled to reconstruct the full message from its fleeting fragments. Constructed in the early 20th century, the MV Sohi was designed for tropical and long-haul routes, carrying essential goods between Indian Ocean ports. Registry documents and construction records confirm its steel hull, twin-engine propulsion, and capacity for both cargo and a small crew of experienced sailors. Shipping manifests detail routine voyages, providing a glimpse into the logistics of maritime commerce in the region during that era. Though primarily functional in design, the Sohi was noted in contemporaneous accounts for its reliability and endurance, attributes that made its sudden disappearance during one fateful voyage all the more alarming to shipping authorities and insurers. On its final journey, the Sohi encountered conditions that were both unpredictable and extreme. Archival weather records describe cyclonic storms moving through the Seychelles corridor, producing towering waves, sudden squalls, and shifting wind patterns capable of overwhelming even the sturdiest vessels. Contemporary maritime incident reports note that these storms often cause communication disruptions and strand smaller vessels in perilous circumstances. For the crew of the Sohi, the sea transformed from a routine highway of trade into a perilous expanse of chaos, forcing emergency measures that culminated in the sending of a fragmented SOS before all contact was lost. The distress transmission itself offers one of the most haunting aspects of the MV Sohi's story. The Morse code, recorded on coastal logs and in sporadic maritime reports, included part of a coordinate line and a clipped call for assistance, abruptly cutting off mid-word. Operators who logged the signal described it as unnervingly precise in its initial dots and dashes, as if the crew had intended to transmit a complete message, only for some external force to sever the line mid-communication. The fragmentary nature of the transmission leaves historians and signal analysts with a chilling uncertainty. What exactly were the crew trying to communicate in those last moments? And why did the message never reach its intended recipients? Nearby vessels in the storm's path reported hearing a faint, incomplete call through static-laden airwaves, prompting frantic attempts to respond or triangulate the source. Some ships changed course in the hope of locating the distressed vessel, while others attempted to broadcast back using emergency frequencies, only to find the signal had vanished as suddenly as it appeared. Maritime logs from the period provide conflicting accounts. Some operators recorded faint Morse patterns that could have been echoes, while others report complete silence following the abrupt truncation. These inconsistencies underscore the difficulties faced by the crew and responders, as well as the challenges inherent in capturing fleeting transmissions in a storm-tossed ocean environment. In reviewing historical radio transmissions and archival maritime records, researchers decades later noticed the recurring patterns appearing under specific conditions. By analysing historical transmissions alongside environmental records, they could partially reconstruct the half message, identifying its rhythmic characteristics and approximate frequency. Modern monitoring stations occasionally detect fragments that match the original SOS pattern, suggesting a remarkable persistence in the signal that defies conventional understanding. Whether these later detections are echoes of the original transmission, products of oceanic propagation anomalies, or an entirely unexplained phenomenon, they have reignited interest in a ship that might otherwise have remained a simple historical footnote. The interruption of the Sohi's distress call has prompted acoustic and radio engineers to explore a wide range of hypotheses. Factors considered include equipment failure, operator error, and environmental interference such as wave action or atmospheric conditions. Oceanographers note that the combination of surface turbulence, thermal layers, and local currents can cause signals to degrade rapidly, especially during violent storms, but these conditions cannot fully account for the sudden cessation of a single, otherwise well-formed message. The mystery persists, as even modern reconstructions, using precise maritime models, leave gaps that no amount of technical analysis can fill, highlighting the persistent strangeness of the half message. The human dimension of the fragmented signal remains equally compelling. Amateur radio enthusiasts, historians, and even local communities along the shipping routes have long speculated on the circumstances surrounding the Sohi's final transmission. Some suggest the incomplete SOS embodies a literal pause between life and death, a signal frozen in time that reminds us of the vulnerabilities faced by sailors in an unforgiving environment. Others see it as a cautionary emblem of the limits of human communication in extreme conditions, a reminder that the ocean can absorb and erase even the most urgent calls for help. Delving into archives, researchers confirmed much of the MV Sohi's technical and historical context, yet the central enigma remains unresolved. Official logs confirm the route, cargo, and timing of the voyage, while meteorological records and contemporaneous reports corroborate the storm conditions. Yet none of these sources provides clarity on why the distress signal ended mid-message, nor why fragments of it persist decades later in obscure recordings. The interplay between concrete evidence and enduring mystery creates a space where fact and speculation intersect, allowing the story of the half message to endure as both history and enigma. Faint but persistent, the half message of the MV Sohi remains incomplete, a brief window into a catastrophe that left little trace but left echoes in radio frequencies and collective imagination. Researchers continue to examine archival logs, modern recordings, and historical weather data, each effort revealing new details while failing to resolve the core mystery. The incomplete SOS functions as a symbol of uncertainty, a maritime ghost lingering in both the ocean and human memory, and its partial transmission continues to captivate those who seek answers about a ship lost to time. Time has passed, yet the truncated SOS of the MV Sohi endures in archives and recordings, a fleeting echo that whispers of lives suspended in the storm's unrelenting grip. the timeless call of the RMS Carpathia. In the quiet hum of a modern monitoring station, an unexpected pulse appeared on a frequency thought obsolete, its rhythmic pattern faint yet unmistakably deliberate. The operators leaned closer, decoding the intermittent signal and tracing its origin through layers of static, only to find it bore the signature of a ship long vanished beneath the North Atlantic waves. By cross-referencing historical maritime archives, they identified the vessel as the RMS Carpathia, lost in 1918 to a torpedo attack, a ship whose name had been etched into history for both tragedy and heroism. The pulses were brief, flickering like an echo from the past, yet each instance was precise, reminiscent of the telegraph patterns used by the crew more than a century earlier. The Carpathia, constructed in the early 1900s, gained renown as a transatlantic liner combining remarkable speed with sturdy resilience. Measuring over 500 feet in length and designed to carry hundreds of passengers alongside a professional crew, the vessel was equipped with the latest maritime technologies of its time. Contemporary ship registries and builders' records note its steel hull, twin engines, and robust wireless capabilities, which allowed for communication across vast stretches of ocean. Its reputation for reliability made its loss all the more striking, reinforcing the enduring fascination with a vessel that had both symbolized human ingenuity and become a silent witness to the perils of wartime navigation. On its final voyage, the Carpathia had been travelling from Liverpool to New York, carrying both cargo and passengers, while the threat of submarine attacks shadowed every shipping route. In July 1918, far from any major port, the vessel encountered the torpedo of a German U-boat, a single strike that sealed its fate within minutes. Naval reports and eyewitness accounts, pieced together from survivor testimonies and wartime documentation, described the ship listing sharply. Radios left manned as officers attempted to transmit distress signals, and the sudden, irrevocable loss of contact. The Carpathia's descent into the cold Atlantic became a somber marker of the war's reach into civilian and merchant shipping. At the heart of the ship, the wireless room housed Marconi telegraph equipment, manned by skilled radio officers trained in emergency signalling, continuous communication, and meticulous log-keeping. Logs from previous voyages reveal the exact sequences used for transmitting coordinates, distress messages, and routine communications, all of which relied on a delicate interplay between operator skill, atmospheric conditions, and electrical integrity. The precision of these transmissions was such that, even decades later, patterns could be recognized, catalogued, and compared, allowing modern researchers to identify faint repetitions of the Carpathia's unique telegraph pulses amidst the ocean of electronic noise. Over time, faint sporadic signals appeared to technicians and historians, strikingly similar to the Carpathia's original telegraph patterns. Detected during unusual atmospheric conditions or anomalies in ionospheric reflection, these signals appeared fleetingly across modern receivers, their source never directly observable. Radio enthusiasts documented these occurrences with careful timestamps and frequency readings, noting the uncanny precision of the pulses despite the century separating them from the ship's last voyage. The phenomenon inspired a blend of scientific analysis and maritime speculation, raising questions about how signals generated by a vessel long destroyed could persist or re-emerge in the electromagnetic spectrum decades later. The Carpathia's legacy, firmly cemented by its role in rescuing survivors from the Titanic disaster, adds a human dimension to these ghostly signals. Newspaper accounts, survivor memoirs, and maritime archives recount the ship's speed, the heroism of its crew, and the dramatic rescue of over 700 people in the frigid waters of the North Atlantic. That same vessel, now a memory preserved in both record and legend, seems to communicate anew in the 20th and 21st centuries, a faint but persistent echo of lives once in peril, and a testament to the enduring human imprint upon technology and memory. In search of answers, researchers have examined multiple hypotheses for why these signals endure. Some suggest atmospheric resonance or ionospheric reflection might carry the old telegraph frequencies across decades, while others point to rare electrical phenomena in the ocean or even in buried cable networks. Experiments with signal replication, using period-accurate telegraph equipment, confirm the clarity and structure of the original pulses, yet fail to account for why modern receivers occasionally detect them without an identifiable source. Each attempt to reconcile these occurrences with known physics and radio theory only deepens the mystery, leaving a gap between expectation and observation that reinforces the Carpathia's eerie posthumous presence. For those who study maritime communication, the signals serve as a bridge across time, a reminder that some transmissions may linger far longer than the vessels that first sent them. Archival logs, historic accounts, and contemporary detections intertwine, creating a layered narrative in which past and present converge. The pulses, brief and intermittent, are devoid of human content, yet imbued with historical significance, as though the ship itself continues to reach out, maintaining a silent dialogue with anyone who listens closely enough to perceive its pattern amidst the noise. No matter how closely monitored or historically recorded, the pulses persist, surfacing unpredictably and leaving only questions suspended in the vast Atlantic night. Scholars, engineers, and enthusiasts alike remain captivated, watching for the next flicker, the next pattern that might hint at an explanation, or conversely, reinforce the sense of timelessness. In a sense, the Carpathia persists both in record and in resonance, a vessel whose final moments and subsequent echoes defy simple closure and continue to occupy a liminal space between history, technology, and mystery. The RMS Carpathia, gone for decades, sends telegraph pulses that shimmer across today's receivers, a phantom signal resisting the past.